She looked straight through him at the market, his own granddaughter, and kept walking. No scene. Just the clean break of silence. Weeks later, in a concert hall where names are hidden and numbers are called, a string snaps. He's there, anonymous, at a small lamp, fixing what panic breaks. She steps behind the screen. He hears the first note he's been waiting for his whole life. A number becomes a name on the glass. A coil of broken steel becomes a keepsake. Tea waits by a window. What do we owe the people who raised our quiet? What heals faster, the heart or an A string? Late afternoon laid a thin gold over the market awnings, the kind of light that makes bruised fruit look whole and the day seem a little longer than it is. Vendors lowered tops by an inch to cut the glare. A girl in a denim jacket counted cherries into a paper bag without looking up. Somewhere at the end of the block, a delivery truck idled. The air smelled of oranges split for samples, wet greens stacked with their roots still clotted in soil, and the dull iron of the old streetcar rails that ran like seams through the asphalt. James Whitaker stepped out from the butcher's line with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. He carried it like something that could tear if he held it wrong. A forearm under it, a palm steady at the side. His cap sat low on his forehead against the light. He paused near the corner where the florist kept buckets of short-stem carnations. Each bucket the same chipped blue, the water clouded from the day's work. He saw her before she saw him. The crowd made space for travel and not much else. So, it took a beat to be sure. Black hair pulled back. The same careful posture. The case slung over her shoulder by a wide strap, the kind meant for weight. He knew the case. He had carried it once when the strap had frayed. He lifted his hand to wave. Not high, just enough to be seen, above the heads moving between them. The parcel shifted, and the twine cut a shallow line across his fingers. He did not notice. The hand stayed raised. Ava looked up. For a moment, in the gap between one set of shoulders and the next, their eyes met. It was a plain meeting of sight, no drama in the angle, no sound pressed upon it. The seconds did not slow. They kept their ordinary pace. A bus hissed as its door opened. A child laughed because of something that had nothing to do with either of them. A pigeon beat its wings to clear a passing cart. She did not alter her step. She adjusted the strap by an inch, as if the weight had drifted, and continued on. The case tapped her hip. Her friends moved with her. Two young faces turned to speak, one hand cutting the air to mark a point. Words rose and fell without shape at a distance. She looked past him, not above him, not below, through him. As people look through a pane of glass when the glare on it keeps their own reflection at bay. James did not call her name. The market had its own noise, steady and layered. Announcements, prices, a bell above a door. Voices that did not carry far, but carried enough. His name would have sounded strange in it, too private for the wide air. So he kept the hand up for a second longer than was needed. The palm open, the fingers set, a small flag that no one saluted. Then he lowered it. The florist reached into a bucket and pulled out a stem that had lost half its petals. She shook her head at it and slipped it aside. Across from her, the man at the spice stall bent over a tray and smoothed the cumin with the back of a spoon. A delivery boy nudged a dolly over the rails and steadied the wobble with a foot. The day resumed its work around the small space where a hand had been raised and not answered. Ava's friends laughed at something. The three of them passed the bus stop, skirts of light shifting over their shoulders as clouds thinned in front of the sun. The strap of the case slipped again and was set again. The light gilded the zipper. Half a block more, and they would be past the bakery with the window that fogged even in fine weather. James adjusted the parcel against his chest. The butcher had marked the paper in pencil, small and neat, the weight and the cut. He read the numbers without meaning to, as if the graphite could explain something. A fly landed on the florist's signboard and rubbed its legs together. A sign for sweet corn fluttered on a string. The corner where he stood had a dark seam where 2 years of feet had worn the curb into a shallow trough. He did not move out of it. A woman with a stroller angled past and said, "Sorry," though she had not touched him. He stepped back half a step and nodded. The stroller's wheels clicked where the rails crossed. The baby slept, mouth open, one hand fisted against its chest as if holding a small secret. The moment of recognition, if it was that, had no edges to catch. It left no scratch on the day that anyone else could see. James's cap pressed a line across his forehead. He lifted it and set it again. The parcel had warmed in his arms the way wrapped things warm, muffling their own cold until they matched the person who carries them. He shifted it to the other arm. Ava's shoulder turned for a narrow pass between two boys with a crate. The case cleared without touching. The boys did not look up. She reached the crosswalk and stood at its edge. The red hand lit on the pole. She did not press the button. When the light changed, she stepped off. Her friends stayed close. Their mouths kept moving, their feet making the small adjustments. Needed to keep pace with one another, and not lose the thread of what was being said. James watched the back of her head, until the crowd made a pattern that was only crowd again. He let out a breath, and felt the space it left. Not relief, not ache. Space. He looked down at his shoes. Dust held to the stitching where leather met sole. He brushed it once against the back of his other pant leg, and left the rest. The florist reached for a fresh bucket. "You need anything today, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, in the tone people use when they are sure of the answer. He turned and gave her his usual small smile, the one that saved both of them from adding to the day's inventory. "Not this time," he said. His voice was steady. He tipped his cap. A gust came up the street and rattled the awnings. A row of plastic price cards clicked against their metal clips, each card tapping the next in a chain. The smell of oranges lifted and shifted, replaced for a moment by the clean wet of melting ice from the fishmonger's tray. The delivery truck moved off. The idling sound faded. James stepped out of the trough at the curb and into the slow stream of the market. One foot and then the other. He did not look over his shoulder. A vendor called out a number. A child asked if cherries counted as a vegetable, if they were red enough. Somewhere, a radio played a song that had survived too many summers to be claimed by this one. He adjusted his grip on the parcel, and the twine cut the other hand, a matching line. He did not notice. He walked. The light stayed gold a little longer. Then it thinned. By evening, the market had folded itself into crates and rubber bands. But the day did not end where the awnings came down. A girl with a phone had filmed a slice of the afternoon without thinking much about it. A man in a cap. A hand raised. A young woman, looking straight ahead. The clip was short. It did not wobble. It caught the moment as a moment, then stopped. She sent it to a friend with a small line of text that named no one and meant little. The friend passed it on. The line of text changed. By night, the clip no longer belonged to the girl who found it. At the corner bar. The screen above the pool table showed highlights no one watched until the bartender switched to a channel that collected street videos. Laughs came at their own places. The sound dropped out, and captions appeared in big white letters that said what the producers thought should be said. Someone rapped the counter with a ring and asked for another round. The clip played between a dog on a skateboard and a busker who swallowed a sword. It held its space and then moved aside. Phones lit in kitchens and buses and quiet rooms. The same 10 seconds carried across small glass. Stripped of the noise of the street it came from and given the noise of strangers who decided what it meant. Comments stacked under it like tiles on a roof. Some were jokes. Some were sharp. Some were the kind that try to sound kind and carry their own weight anyway. The words over the clip kept changing. In one version, the man became a stranger. In another, he became a man who must have done something wrong. In a third, he was no one at all, only a hand raised into air. James set the parcel on his kitchen counter and untied the twine. The knot eased without trouble. He placed the paper on the back of a chair to flatten, the way he always did, because paper can be used twice. He filled the kettle and put it on the flame. The stove made its small click and then its low blue bloom. The sound of water shifted from still to moving. He turned the radio to notches to the left until the static cleared and a voice came through soft from far away. He did not see the clip. He did not know it existed. He sat at the small table with a mug and let the steam fog his glasses. Outside, a car door closed. A dog barked once and stopped, as if remembering that night is not the time for long stories. Somewhere above him, a neighbor dragged a chair an inch to the right and decided that was enough. On the bus the next morning, two boys watched the clip with their heads close and spoke in the low, bright tones boys keep for things that are not theirs. A third leaned over the seat to read the caption and added a theory that rested on nothing but its own ease. An older woman took out her knitting and made a row that did not need attention. She did not look at the screen, but the light from it painted a small panel of moving white on the window beside her. At the market the florist had already heard about it from a cousin who worked a late shift stocking shelves. "It's him," the cousin had said. "You're a man with the cap." The florist had not clicked. She had carried buckets from the sink and told herself the cousin must be wrong. In the morning she saw James walk by with his empty string bag and she said, "Morning," as she always did. He tipped his cap and looked at the carnations, and then at the sky, which was clean and without promise. The butcher asked if he wanted the usual. James nodded. The chalkboard listed prices that had held steady for 3 weeks. A fly tested the edge of the case, and found it cold and moved away. The butcher wrapped a cut, and wrote the numbers in pencil. It looked like yesterday and the day before. The bell over the door answered the opening and the closing without favor. A girl near the spice stall looked from her phone to James and then back again and did not speak. She watched him the way people watch a landmark that appears in a story, on their screen and in their own street at the same time. The clip had left its frame and stepped into the morning air. It had given everyone something to say and nothing to hold. James carried the parcel home. He put the paper to flatten. He put the kettle on. The radio found a station where the voice did not have to shout. The noise of the clip went on elsewhere, like weather in another town. In his kitchen, the water began to boil. He turned the flame down a little, the way you do when you want something to last. The light thinned as he left the market. A narrow wind moved down the street, carrying the cool damp of the river to avenues away. James shifted the parcel against his chest and stepped off the curb when the signal turned. The rails of the old streetcar crossed the lane at a shallow angle. He raised his foot a little higher than needed out of habit and cleared them cleanly. A cyclist rang a bell without hurry. A bus sighed at the corner, let off 3 people, and pulled away with a soft pull that sounded like cloth being drawn through a ring. He took the same route as always. Not because it was shorter, but because it was known. Past the shop that sold keys, cut while you wait. Past the barber with the striped pole that spun slow, even when the chair inside was empty. The barber looked up, saw him, and raised 2 fingers. James tipped his cap. No one spoke. The air held the talk that fills cities when the day is close. Too closing, polite, brief, and light enough to float. The parcel warmed toward him. The paper had a small tear at one corner, where the twine had rubbed. He pressed a thumb there to hold it down. A sparrow hopped between the iron fence bars along the elementary schoolyard and pecked at something no one else would see. A crossing guard stood with her sign folded under her arm. The last children gone. The last parents already turned back to their own streets. She checked the sky and the time and walked away, her shoes clicking an even beat on the pavement. He passed the bakery window where racks cooled loaves that sent out the steady smell of yeast and heat. The glass fogged from the cakes and cleared again, fogged and cleared, a slow tide on a small shore. Inside, a boy wiped the counter in straight lines that overlapped but did not cross. James paused and looked in, then moved on. He did not need bread today. He knew what was already in his cupboard. He knew what he would cook and how much would be left. At the next block, a delivery van had backed too close to the curb. A woman with a stroller waited for space to open, patient as a person. Who knows that waiting is part of most days? James stepped down into the street, walked around the bumper, and stepped up again. His knee clicked once. It did not complain. He walked on. A trolley of crates rattled from a side door behind the grocer's. The man pushing it kept his head down and pushed straight, his hands wrapped in cloth to keep the metal from biting skin. A cat sat on the loading step and watched as if it owned the place and the hour. James lifted his cap a half-inch toward it and smiled. The cat looked past him with the flat patience cats keep for people. A siren sounded somewhere far and faded. At once. The kind that says, it is not for you, not for this block, not for this day. He turned onto his street. The maples along the curb had leafed out fully, their shadows drawn like lace on the sidewalk. The mail carrier was already 2 houses ahead, putting thin stacks into boxes with a motion that had no wasted second. She nodded without breaking. Stride he nodded back. A flyer sat under the rubber band on his own small bundle. It said there would be repairs to water lines on Tuesday, and asked for patience between 10 and 4. He pulled the flyer free and folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. Tuesday could hold its own when it came. The building smelled the way it always did. A little of wood polish, a little of old paint, a little of last night's dinner lingering on the hall air, because the vent fan at the end of the corridor breathed only when it wanted to. He climbed the stairs, one hand on the rail, parcel balanced against his chest. The stair treads gave their soft complaint where people had stepped on them for years. At his floor he paused, listened for the shift that says someone is behind a door with a hand on the knob. Heard nothing, and moved on. Inside. The rooms received him without comment. The light from the window lay across the table in a long rectangle that reached almost to the sink. He set the parcel down where the sun warmed the wood and untied the twine. He wound the twine into a small loop and put it in the drawer. He kept things that might be useful again. The paper he smoothed with the flat of his palm and set on the back of a chair to remember its shape. He washed his hands. The water came on clean and ran at a steady line. He watched it for a moment, as if a tap could tell the time. The kettle filled to the mark. He set it on the stove and turned the knob until the burner found a quiet blue. The kettle's handle had a nick in the metal where it had fallen once years ago. His hand found the nick without looking. The radio on the shelf above the sink gave a breath of static and then settled on a voice that read the traffic report in a tone that suggested the roads would be themselves, no matter what lanes were closed. He moved the chair an inch to the left and sat. He did not take off his cap. He did not turn on the overhead light. The late afternoon kept enough of itself to see by. Across the room, the shelf held the same books in the same order they had kept for a decade. A pencil lay on the sill. A small cracked cup from a long-closed diner kept paperclips. The clock over the door ticked, counted, and did not urge. The kettle began to work. First a murmur, then a sound like breath behind a door. On the table, the parcel waited for the knife. But there was no need to hurry it. He looked at the line the twine had pressed into his fingers. It had risen into pale ridges and had already begun to fade. He rubbed the place once and stopped. From the street came a car radio turned too loud for one beat at a red light. Then it moved on, and the block was itself again. The kettle lifted into a soft whistle. He took it off the flame before the sound grew sharp. Water met leaves in the pot. Steam rose in a small curled line. He poured, then set the lid and waited. He did not look at his phone. He did not look at the clock. He let the room hold him the way familiar rooms do. When the tea was ready, he poured and sat back. He sipped. He said nothing. The day continued in its ordinary way. And the walk home ended where it always ended, in a kitchen that kept its own, quiet and asked nothing more than to be used. On Saturday mornings the house woke in sections, first the kitchen light, then the kettle. Then the radio tuned low enough that the announcer sounded like someone speaking from a room down the hall. James set 2 bowls on the table, because that is what he did when she stayed over, even if sometimes she slept late, and the second bowl sat with a spoon across it, catching the soft square of sun that moved along the wood as the hour turned. Ava used to come down the stairs, with one hand on the banister and the other carrying whatever she had decided was important for the DAA book, with a cracked spine, a sheet of stickers, a folded page from school. She wore socks that never matched. She sat, and before the milk reached the cereal, she would say, "Granddad," the way children say a word that fits in their mouth and their day at the same time. She said it easily. The name found its place and stayed there. The table collected the small work of those mornings. Spelling lists written on lined paper with letters that leaned forward, as if they wanted to arrive ahead of themselves. Math sheets with pencil smudges where an answer had been thought through and changed. He kept a tin of short pencils, sharpened to neat points in a coffee mug by the salt. When she forgot a word, he would ask her to say it out loud, letter by letter, and let the sound of it show the piece that was missing. She learned to hear what she could not yet see. Dot's shoes were tied on the front steps because the light was best there. He sat 2 steps down so his hands were leveled with the laces, and she balanced her heel on the higher step so the knot could be made tight without pinching. He always checked the tongue so it lay flat. When she learned to tie them herself, he set his hands aside and watched her make the loops and cross them. Watched the brief fight between lace and fingers settle into a proper knot. She grinned and said, "Granddad, look." He looked, and he nodded, and the knot held up to the walk, to the park. The park had a tree that leaned toward the path, as if it wanted to hear the conversations that passed under it. They counted dogs together and kept the number in their heads, without writing it down. If the soft-serve truck came, they stood in the shade and split a cone and watched a skate. We'll find the one small stone that could throw its owner off balance, for a step, and then not matter at all. On the way home she would pick a dandelion that had gone to seed and blow it clean, and he would brush the white threads from her sleeve at the door. In the living room, the violin sat on the low table when she began to learn. At first, it looked too big for her hands. He showed her how to lift the case by its handle without letting the weight pull her shoulder forward. He taught her to set the bow down flat when she stopped, to wipe the strings with a soft cloth, to turn the pegs slowly and feel the pull before it sang. When a note went sour, she wrinkled her nose and found the pitch again by sliding up and back as if walking to a door and then away from it until it was the right door to open. Between pieces she said, "Granddad," and waited for him to nod before starting the next line of notes. Winter made the rooms smaller. They leaned over puzzles, corners first, edges next, sky last, because sky repeats itself and needs patience. He kept the lid near so the picture could be checked and checked again, though both of them knew it by heart before the last piece found its place. When lights flickered once during a storm, she held the candle while he struck the match, and they kept it in a jar so the flame would not complain about the draft under the door. She said his name to tell him she was not afraid. The house carried these things without effort. The chair near the window had the small shine that comes from a hand resting on it most days. The rug kept a slight flattening where her knees had pressed during board games that needed a floor. On a shelf, a jar held buttons she once sorted by color, then by size, then by no rule at all, because sometimes rules get in the way of seeing what is there. A paper snowflake, careful and thin, hid behind the clock because it had been put there and never moved again. On school mornings, they counted steps from the corner to the crosswalk and kept the number like a secret. If rain began halfway, he would say, "We'll reach it in 12," and he would be right most of the time. She liked being right more than being early. She said Granddad when he miscounted on purpose to make her correct him. There was no ceremony to any of it. The name was part of the room, part of the steps, part of the way the spoon found the side of the bowl, and the shoelace found its knot. Years stack in quiet layers, when no one is trying to make them into a story. He had not needed a record then, not beyond the small ledger. He kept in a drawer to remember dates and bus fares, and the day when the bow grip changed from fist to fingers. The drawer slid open and shut without noise. The pages stayed flat. Now, the rooms held the same objects in the same places. The mug of pencils kept its careful points. The front step kept its light. The tree by the park still leaned. He moved through these things, and they moved around him in the way familiar things do. The name was absent in the air, but not in the wood. He set a hand on the rail, and felt the smooth place worn by a palm that was not his. He said nothing. The kettle began to heat. The radio spoke in its low room down the hall voice. And the house, which remembers more than it tells, kept her Saturdays, where they would not be lost. By morning, the clip had learned to travel faster than rumor. It opened automatically inside messaging threads, rolled without sound until a thumb tapped it, and then repeated. 10 seconds, no more. A neat loop cut clean at both ends. A man in a cap lifts his hand. A girl adjusts a strap and keeps walking. The crowd flows between them like a small river that does not know it is being filmed. The clip ends before any face fully turns. The world supplies whatever it wants for the missing parts. Phones lit on buses, in hallways, at kitchen counters, where toast cooled and went to bread again. The software added its own touch, an auto caption that called the street a storet, a guess at grandfather that came out grandfather in white letters that skated across the bottom. Someone downloaded the file and laid music. Under it, a piece with piano keys, falling like light rain. Someone else stripped the sound and drew a red circle around the raised hand, as if it might be missed. Then another circle around the girl's side profile. Then an arrow that insisted where attention should go. The same video wore many names. City moment. Why people change. Families in public. A version showed it at half speed, as though slower frames reveal careful truth. Another sped the 10 seconds until it looked like shyness or flight, depending on the viewer. Comments settled like silt in layers below each post. Some were offers of certainty. Some were small, hard stones. A few tried kindness and used words that scratched anyway. At the high school, phones slid out between bells. A hallway speaker announced an assembly for next week and then crackled into a silence that made it sound as if the building were breathing. In the orchestra room, a violin case clicked open, foam creaked, a bow hair snagged on a latch and freed itself. Ava set her case on the table and glanced at the screen of a friend who did not intend to show her anything, and did. The friend made a small sound that could have been sympathy or surprise. The clip began again without being asked. Ava watched herself not look. She recognized the movement of her hand on the strap, the quick shift to settle the weight. She noted a strand of hair that had come loose from the tie, the angle of her chin she never saw until a camera showed it. She did not recognize the man's face the way the comments recognized it. On the screen, the cap blurred his features. The light flattened the space where a smile might have been. She looked away, then back. The video returned to its start. 10 seconds take no time to become more than themselves. In a group chat, her name appeared next to questions that did not ask. That you, on Main. A sticker came in with a blank cartoon face and a line that pretended to laugh. She typed 3 words that said everything and nothing. On my way. She closed the case with both hands and felt the soft resistance of the foam against the bridge. The room around her tuned to a single A in slow waves. At the market. The florist's cousin finally sent the link she had mentioned the night before. The florist clicked it, with a finger still wet from stems, and watched the street she knew behave like a stage. She recognized the corner by the chipped bucket, the angle where the awning catches light and turns it into a square on the sidewalk. She replayed it once, then twice. The way you check a price you already know, but hope to find changed. When James passed with his string bag, she watched his face for any sign that a screen somewhere had found him. There was none. In the barbershop, the strip pole turned at its patient speed. A customer held his phone up for a moment, as if showing a weather map, then set it face down on his lap when the clippers rose to his ear. The barber glanced at the thumbnail and blinked once. He did not press for context. He cut and brushed and folded the cape and said nothing. He did not mean. Local pages took the clip and gave it a caption that looked like civic concern. An advice column reshared it under a heading about boundaries. A small blog set in a plain font insisted it proved a point about a generation it did not bother to name. A moderator deleted 3 comments and kept 6 that were worse, because they fit neatly in the row. James boiled water at the same time as always. He opened the paper on the chair and smoothed it again, though it was already flat. The radio gave the weather a little earlier than usual and named the river level as steady. He took his mug to the window and watched the maple shadow lift from the curb by an inch. He did not know he had been seen not being seen. He did not feel the net tug at his sleeve. Across town, Ava watched the clip one last time, then turned off the screen and pressed her thumb against the quiet glass until it cooled. The bell rang. She lifted the violin and set her chin to the rest, and drew a note out long enough to cover the space where the phone had been. Outside the practice room, a teacher walked by, heard the pitch hold true, and kept going. The clip kept traveling upstairs and downstairs, and out of the building altogether. But for a while the sound stayed, full and unbroken. The drawer did not stick. It never had. A gentle pull, and it slid forward on wood that had learned the habit of moving smoothly. Inside were the small ordinary things a life collects and keeps because they may be useful again. Rubber bands looped through one another, a roll of twine, a tape measure with a dent near the 6-inch mark, a book of stamps whose picture changed each year, and beneath them all, the ledger. It was not grand. Black cloth over board, corners rubbed too gray, the spine lettered in gold. That had given up most of its shine. James lifted it by the foredge so the cloth would not tear further, and placed it on the table where the sun made a neat rectangle. The cover was warm. He set a palm on it, and felt the slight give of paper settling under paper. Then he opened to the middle, not for a reason, just because the middle keeps the voices of both ends. The pages had been ruled in faint blue before the book found him at the stationery shop 15 years ago. He had chosen it because the paper did not glare and because the line allowed room for figures and small notes without making a fuss. He had never numbered the pages. Dates did that work well enough. The pencil he used most often left a soft gray that did not flake. Graphite stayed where it was put if you asked it politely. He read without reading, the way people do when they know the story and are checking that it remains itself. July 6th. Bus fare. 2 ways. 1.50. Lunch at the park stand. Corn dog. Apple juice. 5.25. Band-aid from vending machine after small fall. Left knee. 0.75. October 12th. School book fair paperback about horses. Signed to Ava. Keep reading. 7.00. A line under it. She read in the back seat all the way home. No car sickness. February 3rd. Violin rosin. 4.00. Peg compound. Small 2. 3.50. Note showed how to turn only as much as needed. She listened. There were bus transfers folded between some pages. Their ink faded to a tired purple. A receipt for a winter coat, with a button missing that the clerk had promised to replace. The clerk never had, but James had found a match in the jar of buttons on his shelf, and the receipt kept a date. November 18. A printed ticket to a school concert named the program in italics, and the auditorium in bold. She looked at the exit sign twice before starting. He had written in the margin, not as criticism, only as record. He turned back further. A summer column carried more ice creams than he remembered, each one written down with the small honesty that comes from knowing the numbers did not need to be defended. 2 cones, 1 shared, he had once put, then added, Sunny, 84. She said the chocolate fell faster than the vanilla. On a December page, gloves, child size, lined 8.99. Hot chocolate after street tree lighting, 2.50. Bus fare home driver waved us on. No charge. He had circled the last part softly. Not for debt, just to remember the kindness. None of it was a bill. There was no column for what was owed back. No space left blank for repayment. He had not kept it to tally a balance with another person. He used it to fix a day in place, as one fixes a picture to a wall with a small, nearly invisible nail. A ledger makes some people think of money. This one kept time. When the months passed, he could turn a page and find them again, exactly where they had been. Numbered and simple and without the noise that memory collects. Sometimes he noted words she had said because words also have a cost and a worth. Granddad, how long is a song if you don't know where it ends? That line sat in March beside an entry for a cracked E-string replaced while the kettle boiled. Granddad, why are bus seats blue if the sky is already blue? Written under a fare and a transfer. These questions held no price, so the numbers stood beside them like polite chaperones. He reached the first page. It was thin at the edge from being opened often. September 2. First lesson. Shoulder rest set too high. Adjusted. 0.00. He smiled at the zeros. Not as joke, but as acknowledgement that the day had needed no purchase beyond being present. Beneath that, library card renewal. 0.00. She liked the stamp. A neighbor once asked why he bothered to write these things down. He had shrugged and said the book helped him remember when to buy a new set of strings before the old set failed at a bad moment. Helped him see how small costs add up to something that looks like care. There had been no need to explain more. The drawer closed easily, and the house kept its quiet either way. He turned a few recent pages, and the handwriting changed slightly, where his hand had ached one morning, and the pencil line wavered. The last entries were sparse. The book had never asked for commentary, but the white spaces beside the figures felt wider now. Bus fare had not been needed lately. The small notes about lunches and shoes and programs had stopped where routines stop when a person chooses a different street. He rested the pencil on the spine and looked at the line of the last date. Not long ago, he wrote another small thing, because a ledger, to be itself, requires the next mark. June 14th. Carnations 3, white, 3.00 note. Left at the gate. He did not press hard. The graphite sat on the paper as if ready to lift and move away if asked. He closed the book gently and felt the air press out from between the pages. Not a sigh. Just the simple breath of paper being returned to its place. The drawer slid open on the first try and shut on the first try. The ledger settled under the twine and the tape measure, exactly where he would find it the next time a day needed fixing to its name. Outside, the afternoon shifted a degree toward evening. In the kitchen, the kettle remembered its job. The radio named a bridge closure on the north side, and James Whitaker, who kept no bills and wrote no totals, returned to the small work of preparing a meal. His hands moving with the steadiness that makes records unnecessary and keeps them anyway. The chair by the window had been moved an inch toward the light and then not moved back. The sun found it through the morning, left it at noon, and came again in late afternoon. A slow sweep that made a bright bar across the seat and then the back. James kept the jacket there, because fabric does better with air than with a closed door. He told himself this the first day and each day after, though no one asked. The jacket was school red, the kind chosen because it looks good from a distance. A white letter stitched to the chest had a clean serif, its edges still sharp where the machine had set them. The cuffs were striped, white laid into red, elastic gone soft from use. The left cuff showed threads that had loosened where a hand likes to twist when waiting, or where fingers find something to hold while crossing a street. He knew the exact spot. When he raised his own hand to the light, the line of his knuckles matched the place where the knit had thinned. He did not hang it. Hangers give shoulders the wrong shape if left too long. On the chair the jacket lay flat, sleeves folded once across the body in a way that kept the zipper from biting fabric. He ran a lint roller over the arms every few days and lifted off the small dust that finds cloths whether a window is open or not. A cedar block sat on the sill for moths and for the faint clean smell it keeps. He turned the block once a month, the way instructions say, without expecting much from it, beyond habit. The pockets had held the things pockets hold. He emptied them the day he washed it, after the last game that year. From the right he took a crumpled program with names listed smaller than they feel to the people who carry them. From the left he took a receipt for a sandwich, bought at a stand that sold only 4 kinds in a quarter, that had slid under the lining, and found its own corner. He kept the program, and returned the coin to a jar, where coins wait and rarely leave. Wash tag said, cold cycle, no bleach, Dry flat. He followed it because tags asked so little. The red bled once into the towel he used beneath it, not enough to matter. Just enough to remind him that color moves when given water. He set a fan too low and let the air do what it does without hurry. When it was dry, he pressed the collar with his hand and smoothed the seams. The zipper ran straight. The pull had a small nick where metal meets metal. He left it in the dim pot. Of evening, the jacket held the day's light longer than the chair. Sun warms cloth and cloth gives heat back slowly. He did not touch it then. He sat in the other chair, the one kept at the table, and watched the square on the back panel shrink to a thin shape and then disappear. Dust drifted in the beam while it lasted. When the beam was gone, the dust was still there, only less visible. He did not chase it. He rolled the lint again in the morning. Sometimes his hand reached without thinking to the seam at the cuff and checked the loose threads. Fingertips feel what eyes name too quickly. He turned the edge once, found a small knot he had tied last fall when the first strand came free, and pressed it firm. It held. He did not trim anything. Cutting short ends invites unraveling. Leaving them teaches patience to fabric. Neighbors who visited, the few who did, noticed the jacket because the chair made it part of the room. They said nice color, or varsity, or does she still play? He answered with simple words that did not open doors. Yes, she does. Then he asked if they wanted tea or water or neither. And the jacket settled back into the space it occupied, without needing to explain itself. On certain mornings, rain held off. Air not too warm. He opened the window a hand's width so the jacket could take the new air and give its stored air back. Fabric keeps smells when no one asks it to. This one kept a mix that would be nothing to a stranger. Detergent that came unscented, but was not quite. Field dust brought home from a bench. A line of resin where rosin had rubbed the edge of a sleeve on a day when cases were set too close. He could smell it if he lifted the cuff. He did not do that often. He thought about moving the chair back to where it had been, against the wall near the bookcase. He did not. The sun found the jacket here. Light does small work well when given time. The red on the front had dulled by a shade where the bar crossed each afternoon, and the white letter had gone a little softer at its edges. The change was not a loss, only the ordinary proof that days had passed. In the evenings, when he locked the door and turned the radio down to a level that lets a hallway sound through if it needs to, the jacket rested on the chair in its exact fold. The room accepted it as furniture, not display. He set the kettle on, lifted his mug, and glanced toward the window, because that is what a person does when a room holds both a past and a present at once. The jacket did not answer him. It did not need to. It stayed where the sun could reach it and left the rest to time. The whole closet opened with a soft pull and a sigh that belonged to hinges older than most things in the apartment. Coats hung in a short row, sleeves brushing one another in the dark. A pair of boots leaned heel to heel on the floor, salt dried white near the seams from a winter already gone. Behind them, flat and patient, the violin case waited where he had set it last year. He did not reach for it at once. He let the door stay open a hand's width so the closet could take air. Cloth keeps what time gives it. So does a case. He moved the boots aside and lifted the handle with care. The leather was smooth at the curve where fingers always settle. The metal feet at the bottom had taken on a dull shine from floors and bus steps and the backs of chairs. He carried the case to the table and set it down so the latches faced him. He wiped the lid with a soft cloth before opening it. Not for dust alone, but for the simple act of greeting a thing that deserves it. The latches clicked up, left then, right, the small sounds neat and sure. When he raised the lid, rosin dust lifted in the light like fine flour and settled again. The velvet inside had faded where the bridge pressed when the case was closed. A dark oval showed where the shoulder rest sat when she used to keep it in. The bow lay in its clip with the hair slack, as it should be. The sticks curve easy and correct. The violin looked the way a quiet instrument looks, no flash. Just wood that had learned to hold sound. The varnish carried a small scuff near the chin rest from years of use. He did not polish it. A shine added now would not be honest. He touched the tailpiece with one finger to feel the cool of the metal fine-tuners. One tuner sat turned farther in than the others. The E-string had been replaced not long before the case closed for the last time. The old envelope still lay under the neck with its torn edge folded shut. He checked the bridge by sight. It stood straight, feet seated well, grain running clean and tight. He checked the seams with a small beam of light from his keychain, not to pry, only to be sure nothing had opened in the dry months. All held. He pressed the top with the flat of 2 fingers, and felt the firmness that tells you the post inside is where it should be. He did not push. A small test is enough. The strings had gone a touch flat at rest, as strings do when left to themselves in a room that changes with weather. He turned a fine-tuner a quarter turn and then back again, so the thread would not grow stiff. He breathed on the pegs through the F-holes, the way an old teacher had once shown him. Warmth helps would remember its fit and left the tuning to another day. It was not his place to set the pitch. That belongs to the hand that plays. Under the bow, pressed flat by a year, lay a program from the last school concert. The paper had yellowed a shade along its fold. He eased it free, careful not to snag a corner on the clip. The cover listed the pieces in a simple font, movement titles in italics, composer names aligned to the right. He read the order as if it were a map he could still walk. Processional. March in D to folk songs. Beneath them, the string orchestra had closed with something the director always chose for confidence. His own pencil had left a small mark beside one line. Her trio, nothing more than an asterisk. He remembered where he had sat that night. Second row, center. He had watched her glance toward the exit sign once, and then not again. He set the program on the table and looked at the rosin cake. A shallow crack ran across its top, the kind that comes from time rather than force. He lifted it, turned it once, and put it back. He ran the cloth over the strings from bridge to fingerboard, to lift the film that rises even in closed spaces. The cloth came away pale. He folded it to a clean side and wiped again. He did not touch the bow hair. He knew better than to lay oil from skin into what must stay dry. The case held other small things. A pencil cut short and sharpened to a point, for writing fingerings on paper, not on wood. A mute forgotten in a side pocket, rubber still soft. A small envelope of spare strings, with 2 sleeves empty and 2 full. He counted them without thinking. He set them back in their place, and closed the pocket. He did not play. He had never tried. He set the violin back into its cradle, pressed the neck into the shaped support, and turned the bow once so the hair would not catch. He left the program on the table in the square of light. He lowered the lid and felt the hinges meet the base, the way doors meet when they know their work. The latches clicked down, right then left. For a moment he kept his palm on the case. Not possession. Contact. The wood under velvet under cloth under his hand made a simple line from past to present. He lifted the case and returned it to the closet, behind the coats, feet set straight, handle outward. He left the door open, a hand's width again, and stood there, while cool air moved from the hall into the dark dot in the kitchen. The kettle began its low sound. He turned it down so it would not rush. On the table the program lay with its clean list of names. He took a pencil from the cup and wrote the date of that concert in the corner, because dates help a room keep order. Then he set the paper under the magnet on the fridge where recipes and flyers sometimes sit. The house did not change. The case did not ask for anything. The violin stayed where it was, quiet under coats. Holding the shape of notes it would carry again only when the right hands came back to wake them. The gate at the school stood open to the sidewalk, its iron bars painted the kind of green that looks black in shade and fresh in sun. On most days it held only the small notices of a building that keeps its calendar lost. Half-sheets naming bake sales, a schedule for summer grounds, maintenance laminated against rain. This morning a new poster had been taped at eye level, with 4 strips that caught the light like thin panes of glass. James stopped because the page asked to be read. The paper was heavy, a matte white that did not glare. At the top, in letters clean and dark, it named the City Youth Conservatory. Under that a line, open string auditions, 1 full scholarship. The date sat by itself, a sure square of text. Saturday, July 20th, noon doors. Warm-up rooms open at 11. The hall was named in a smaller font just below, the one on the river, with rows of lights across the ceiling like a net. He moved a step closer until his cap brim shadowed the paper. The edges of the tape had lifted a little, where dust finds its way under everything. Someone had pressed a thumb to one corner, leaving the faint oval that fingers make when they do their best against weather. He pressed the opposite corner to match, not as claim, only to help. A list followed, simple and direct. Repertoire posted. 1 etude, 2 orchestral excerpts, and a choice movement from a standard concerto. First page only. It did not say which etude that would be handed out at sign-in. It said, in small type, no names on stage, blind judging. Numbers issued at registration. The rules were plain. No teacher letters, no recordings, no exceptions. Warm-up in assigned rooms only. No practicing in corridors. He read each line twice and felt the weight of a process arranged to be fair. Beside the list, a small map showed the hall's lower level, with arrows to rooms that could hold 4 players at a time. The arrows looped in a tidy way that suggested someone had walked the path with a clipboard and a pencil before they drew it. Registration would be in the west lobby. Candidates were to bring their own music, marked cleanly, and arrive 15 minutes before their number. A note at the bottom, named an email for questions. The font made the @ look almost like a loop of thread. Students passed the gate on their way in and looked only long enough to learn whether the poster concerned them. A boy with a cello case slung high glanced and kept moving the case, shifting his walk by a degree. 2 girls read the title, nodded in the way of people who already knew, and stepped through the bars, their laughter leaving their mouths and the street at the same time. The custodian came out with a staple gun, added 2 staples to the lower corners without removing the tape, and said to no one in particular, "Wind takes these, if you let it." James took a pencil from his inside pocket. It was the short one he used for measuring boards when shelves needed leveling. The point kept careful. He did not write on the poster. He turned a receipt from his wallet and wrote on its blank back, July 20th, noon, West Lobby. Bring music. Blind. He underlined blind once, not for emphasis, only so the word would find his eye again later without asking. He added the hall's address, though he knew it, because addresses help a day begin on time. The sidewalk offered its ordinary movement. A bus sighed beyond the corner. A sparrow startled from the fence and found the crossbeam of the gate, then settled the tape at the top edge of the poster, lifted a fraction, and lay back down. In the bottom right corner of the paper, a line named a phone number for accommodation requests. He appreciated the phrase. It made space without performance. Beside it, smaller still, a note said, "Final round, behind screen. Numbers redrawn. No talking on stage." He pictured the screen they would use, the canvas kind on a frame with small wheels, the carpet strip laid so heels would not give a sound away. He did not send a message. He did not take a picture. He folded the receipt once and slipped it next to his bus card. A child tugged a parent's hand and asked if the conservatory sold snacks. The parent said maybe. The question was not wrong. Halls like that often sell small things to hold time between pieces. James pressed the top tape again, just a gentle push to help it learn its work, and stepped back. The poster carried its information with an even weight. No promises beyond the one it named, a chance. He touched the gate, iron cool under paint, and walked on. The date had fixed itself. The hall had a name that could be found. The rules were clear. The paper would weather. The tape would need another press tomorrow. He would pass again, and read the same words, until the day arrived, and told them what to do. The phone rang at an hour that belonged to neither morning nor afternoon. A narrow slice, when the light on the table is pale, and even when the kettle has not yet been asked to work again. It was the old sort of ring, clear and small, not the busy tune of newer machines. James let it sound twice so he would not seem to have been standing next to it. On the 3rd ring, he lifted the receiver, said his name, and waited for the voice to name itself. Mr. Whitaker. A woman, careful and bright, the kind of voice you hear at a desk with a window. "This is Alina Alvarez from the City Youth Conservatory. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No," he said. The light at the window lay across the jacket on the chair. The kettle sat quiet. "No bad time here. We're phoning about the open string auditions on the 20th, she said. Paper moved near her mouth, the schedule being held in place. "We keep a small crew of on-site technicians really, just steady hands with common sense. Spare strings, quick tune-ups, pegs that slip. That sort of thing. Your name came to us from Mr. Lin at the high school and from Miss Ortega at the instrument repair shop. Both said you were reliable and kind to panic. Would you consider volunteering?" He pictured Mr. Lin's neat bow and Ms. Ortega's shop, with its drawers labeled in a hand that never hurried. He could hear them saying those words, not as flattery but as a plain description of a person who shows up. "What exactly would you need from me?" he asked, not because he didn't know, but so she could say it, and place the shape of the day in the room. "Check-in at 10 in the West Lobby," Ms. Alvarez said. "We open warm-up rooms at 11. Doors to the hall at noon. We'll have a table in the corridor, 2 chairs, a lamp, a small sign that says instrument help. Mostly violin, some viola, an occasional cello emergency. No major repairs, of course, just the quick things that keep a young player from falling apart before a number is called. We provide a kit, but it helps if techs bring what they trust. Peg, compound, cloths, a chin wrist key, extra E-strings, we'll feed you, and there's coffee. It's volunteer, but we can cover bus fare if that's useful. Useful, he said, and made a small mark on the back of a receipt that still sat by the phone from the morning. He underlined the time. 10. Ms. Alvarez paused. The kind of pause a person uses to turn a page. One more thing, she said. Because the first rounds are blind, we keep a clean separation between techs and judging. Still, we ask if you have a student or family member auditioning. It doesn't disqualify, we just note it, so we can avoid awkward moments. My granddaughter plays, he said. He did not say her name. Names complicate what a day is trying to do. She may audition. I don't know. If she does, I can step back if she comes to the table. That's perfect, Ms. Alvarez said. And he could hear a small settling in her voice, as if a chair had found its even leg. Our techs don't see names, only numbers. If you recognize someone, hand them to the next pair of hands. We'll have 3 of you. You'll wear a lanyard, not a halo. She laughed once, soft. You sound like a person who knows where boundaries live. I can sit where I'm put, he said. Then we'd love to have you, she said. I'll email a confirmation, but the phone call is the thing that matters. Sometimes people answer emails too fast and then think. Phones make us think before we answer. Yes, he said. I'll be there. They exchanged the small details that steer a morning. Where to find the back door if the lobby is crowded. Which elevator ignores the basement if you don't hold the button. The color of the volunteer badges. When he set the receiver back, the room kept the echo of a plan. A thin thread stretched from his table to a desk with a window across town. He did not move for a minute. He let the ring and the voice and the promise take their places. Then he stood and opened the drawer where useful things live and began to make a quiet pile. Peg compound, the small tube with its paper label softened by years. A folded cloth that had once been white and had taken on a clean gray. 2 E-strings, ball end and loop, because some tailpieces decide what they will accept and will not be argued with. An A-string. 1 D, because Ds snap on days that have already asked too much. A mute like the one he had found in the case last week. Rubber still willing. A chin wrist key tied to a ribbon so it wouldn't walk away on its own. From the closet he took the small canvas bag with the stitched bottom. The one he used when the high school held concerts and the auditorium asked for extra hands. He checked the strap where it met the body. 1 stitch had loosened. He threaded a needle, the yellow kind you find in hotel kits, and put the stitch back without making a show of it. He slipped a flashlight into the side pocket, taped a strip of paper over part of its lens so the light would be kind and not blind, a pupil already working hard. He added bandages, nail clippers for the player who discovers a ragged edge at the worst moment. A soft pencil sharpened short for markings. On paper if a page turn asks for mercy. He opened the violin case in the closet, just long enough to lift the spare bridge he kept, not to fit, only to sight against a warped one if needed. He put it back. He counted batteries for the small tuner. He did not plan to use his hand and ear, were enough, but others sometimes needed a number to steady themselves. He slipped in a pack of crackers, a wrapped square of chocolate, because panic is often hunger. Wearing a mask dotted the table. He wrote in the ledger, July 20th. Bus fare volunteer. String spares note. Sit where you're put. Step back if needed. The numbers were small. The page did not mind. He reached for the phone to call no one and tell no one, then set his hand down again. The kettle had been waiting without complaint. He raised the flame, listened for the first low sound, and turned the knob down so it would not rush. Through the window the maples were still, the leaves holding the light on their backs. He pictured the hall by the river, the ceiling lights strung like a net. The carpet run late to catch heels before the screen. The west lobby with its high panes that make a person feel taller, just for standing there. When the kettle began to whisper, he took it off early, poured, and watched the steam rise in a neat column. He set the cup near the canvas bag, and looked at what he had gathered. There was nothing there that would make a headline. There was everything there that would keep a morning from breaking where it didn't have to. He closed the bag, and set it by the door. On the chair, the red jacket found the last of the light, and kept it a while, as cloth does. He finished his tea. The house held its small readiness, and asked for nothing more. The hall by the river woke early. Doors unlocked with the soft twist of a key that had been cut true. A mop passed once over the entry tiles, leaving shallow arcs that dried as the morning moved from pale to useful. In the west lobby the panes took the light and lifted it, even on a day that promised nothing more than steady weather. A sign on an easel said registration in letters large enough not to be argued with. Below it, a paper cup kept a handful of pens that had been tested and set back point down like reeds. James arrived before the clock struck 10. Miss Alvarez met him with a lanyard and a smile that had already answered 5 questions before he stepped through the door. The volunteer badges were blue. His reed instrument held in clean black. No name, no title, only the task. She pointed to the corridor off the lobby, where a folding table had been set, and a lamp clipped to its edge, with a mouth like a small brass bird. 2 chairs, a sign out of the same printer, string repairs, quick fixes only. He liked the only, it kept the day inside lines. He set his canvas bag beneath the table and took out what he trusted. Cloths folded and placed in a small stack. Peg compound, a chinwrist key tied to its ribbon. 3 envelopes of strings fanned, so he could see which was which at a glance. Nail clippers, bandages, a pencil sharpened short. Ms. Alvarez set a plastic bin next to his things, with extra little bottles of hand sanitizer. Tissues, a roll of tape, things that make people braver for no reason they can name. You'll have company, she said, nodding down the corridor. A second tech, a compact man with hair clipped close and hands that had built small, reliable objects for a living, lifted his chin by way of greeting. Miguel, he said. They did not shake. They did not need to. Warm-up rooms opened on the hour. Keys struck pianos in small, careful clusters to test whether weather had crept in and changed anything. From one door came a scale, climbed slowly, and climbed again. The pitch held just longer than comfort at the top. From another, an open A sounded, and again, until it stopped being a note. It became a line on which the morning hung. The hall's carpet kept footsteps quiet. The walls kept the noise from becoming noise. Registration began. Numbers were handed over in exchange for names that were typed, and then folded under a paperclip, as if names were fragile in daylight. Parents asked questions that had already been answered by the poster, but needed to be spoken. To calm hands, west lobby for checks. Warm-up rooms down this corridor. Screen on stage. The staff spoke at the level that steadies instead of stirs. James adjusted the lamp so the light fell soft and direct over the table. The first visitor came with a viola and a breath taken too quickly. Peg slipped, she said in the tone people use when they want the sentence to mean less than it does. He smiled and nodded and set the instrument chin down on the cloth. Turned the peg with the modesty such things require. Let the string climb back to where it should rest. Breathed once, and handed it back. Fine, he said. He was not the sort of man to say perfect. Not to a player holding her next 10 minutes like glass. He stood when a cello arrived with a tailpiece hanger that had shifted a degree from center. He sighted the bridge, pressed it with the flat of his fingers, drew it forward by the least motion, and no more. There, he said, on the wall opposite, a corkboard held a map of the rooms with pins to mark, which were full. Pins moved inward, outward, inward. The morning circulated. He stepped into an empty warm-up room once, to straighten a stand, whose clamp had begun to pretend at being useful. A stack of extra music stands leaned against the far wall. Their metal had grown smooth, where hands had learned them. He stood behind the stack for a minute, to tie the loose strap on his bag that had worked at itself and come unsure. He used the ribbon from the chinwrist key to remind it what it was meant to do, and tucked the key inside his shirt pocket until the knot remembered how to hold. The room next door hummed with the slow conversation of boughs and rosin. Someone set an open case on a chair and reached for tape to label a part that needed no label, but wanted one. A clock clicked softly, without ticking. On the corridor floor, thin strips of gaffer tape kept their straight gray lines where someone had laid them a season ago to guide the tables into even slots. No one noticed the tape until their shoes changed sound at the edge of it. Near 11, the door at the end of the corridor opened and a familiar shape came into view, in the shape of a day that had chosen its moment. A black case on a broad strap, hair pulled back, shoulders square in the way of a person who has learned to carry weight without complaint. A friend to either side. Their talk just under laughter. The kind of conversation people make when steadying one another with noise. Ava. She did not look up. She read the number she'd been handed and slipped it under the clip on her case, as if numbers belonged in that place. The strap fought her shoulder by an inch, and she let it, then set her hand on the case, as if settling a small argument. Her friend's shoes whispered over the corridor carpet. They paused at the map, found the warm-up room, marked with their number. One friend touched her elbow and tipped her head toward the nearest door, where a single note had risen and stopped. Ava nodded and stepped, careful with the first footfall. As if the ground itself needed proof, she intended no harm. James did not step out. He did not speak. He moved backwards the measure of 2 slow feet, and let the stack of stands take him from view. His hands remembered the table, and found the cloth and folded it, unfolded it, set it down. The ribbon in his pocket pressed lightly against his thumb. He watched through the thin gap between the stand legs as she passed 1, 2, 3 breaths and found the room to the left. A volunteer with a clipboard smiled an equal smile for each young face. Numbers, not names. The door closed softly behind them. The corridor kept its length. He stayed where he was for a count that had no number. The bowhairs next door drew an A, and the room answered. Someone laughed and apologized for the laugh, and then for the apology. The clock clicked. The air carried rosin and the invisible cool of hallways that do not belong to any one person. Ms. Alvarez walked by with a stack of fresh programs under her arm and did not look in. The way a person who trusts a morning keeps moving. He came back to the table and sat. A boy, with a dangling fine tuna, came forward with both hands, holding the instrument as if it might decide to be a bird. James fixed the tuna by a turn and a half, then loosened, then turned again, the way one persuades small metal to remember its job. Good, he said. You're early. The boy nodded, set the instrument to his chin, and copied the A he heard from the room to his right. Down the corridor, a door opened, and a volunteer called a number. Footsteps. Another door shut. A life took its place behind a screen. The lamp on the table kept its small circle of light. James looked at the empty chair beside him, and then at the stack of stands. He did not move them. He did not need to. The next player came with a string gone woolly at the nut. He trimmed it with the care given to a cuff thread, not to be pulled, tipped the peg a fraction, set the line straight, and sent the player on. Ava did not come to the table. She did not need him. She had her number. She had a room. The morning held, and the next time he saw her, it was as it had to be, her shoulders in a doorway, eyes on the floor to keep the path smooth, his figure no more than a shape behind the clean geometry of metal and work. She passed. He breathed. The corridor continued its measured hum. The stage smelled faintly of dust warmed by lights. The kind of clean that comes from things being used, not stored. Crew hands rolled the screen into place and locked its small wheels with their feet. A narrow strip of carpet lay from the wings to the center mark so heels would tell no stories. Beyond the proscenium, the hall was a quiet sea of seats, each one folded and waiting. Upstage right, a table had been set with 3 sharpened pencils laid parallel, a glass pitcher with a fogged band near its middle, and a stack of forms clipped at the top with metal jaws. A clock the size of a bread plate hung on the side wall where only the panel could see it. Mr. Whitaker. Miss Alvarez stood in the wing, with the crisp folder of a person keeping time from spilling. She kept her voice pitched to the hush the stage demands. One of our adjudicators. His delayed train stuck between stations. We can start prelims if someone sits in to keep the table balanced. She lifted a hand before he could object. No scoring. Process only. You'd note the candidate number, flip the ready light, and make sure forms travel the right way. 10, maybe 15 minutes. He looked at the table, at the screen, at the carpet's straight line. He looked down at his hands, the small rosin and string dust in the ridges of his fingers. I can sit where I'm put, he said softly. No marks. Exactly, she said, the relief in her shoulders as brief as a breath. Just a warm presence where a chair should be. She led him up the wing. The stage creaked in the honest way stages do when weight finds them. He took the far chair, the one against the wall, and folded his canvas bag under it so it would not make a shape of its own. The other 2 judges arrived in the near same moment. Strangers to one another in the way people are until a task makes them a unit. Ms. Chen, a chamber coach with a pen that seemed to float when she wrote, took the center. Mr. Halvorsen, a retired concertmaster whose back kept the memory of straight chairs, took the aisle seat. They nodded to James without fuss, and the 3 pencils ceased to be decorative. A volunteer placed a small switchbox at James's elbow ready in green. Holden Amberand explained in a whisper what needed no rehearsal. When the candidate number is called at the wing and the stage manager signals, flip to green. When bows stop and the page is signed, amber. A second volunteer, the proctor, set a thin kitchen timer by Ms. Chen's notes. Its tick almost not a sound. Forms for each number bore only a circle for continue or thank you, and lines. For observations that might help a young player know where to place the next hour. Names nowhere. Numbers everywhere, they began. Candidate 12. The stage manager murmured into his headset, then let his palm fall open to James. James pressed the green with a fingertip. A quiet footfall on the carpet. The soft whisper of fabric. On the far side of the screen, the instrument found the A, and the whole filled with a single line that lived for itself, and then ended. The etude issued from the page as if it had always been there, the kind with corners that ask for the hand to square itself. Ms. Chen marked one word in a margin. Steady, and drew a breath that released a little more room into the air. Mr. Halvorsen wrote nothing, listening instead with his thumb pressed to his lower lip. An old habit. James made the small notes of a clerk. 12 on time. He watched the way the sound held to the room, and did not try to guess the face it came from. The screen did its work. He did his dot numbers, followed, and became a rhythm. Some bows opened the door and walked through. Some knocked at the right place, and forgot why they had come. Once, a peg slipped in the first measure, and the candidate stopped and asked, carefully, if they might begin again. Miss Chen said, of course, in the tone people use when they want the world to be kind. James pressed amber, then green. The second start found the note, and kept it. Between candidates, he turned the forms toward Ms. Alvarez's weight in folio, and kept the corners flush, because corners deserved that. He poured water and remembered to set the pitcher far from paper. He did the small work that makes other work look inevitable. Candidate 17, the stage manager said, and his hand lifted, then lowered. James pressed green. A footfall he knew without sight, crossed the carpet. Weight placed carefully at the outside edge. Then the inside, the way a person walks when a case has taught them to move in a certain measured way. He did not breathe differently. He did not press the switch any harder. A bow met a string, and the room took the sound into itself. The line was one he recognized, not because he had seen the music, but because he had heard the hours behind it. The first run of notes was not heroic. It was correct. Then more than correct, as the hand remembered itself. At the first shift, the tone thinned, and then found its width again, like a person moving from shade to sun and not flinching. Miss Chen's pencil made 2 small commas, phrasing, not faults. Mr. Halvorsen put a dot above a note on his copy as if to thank it for arriving on time. James looked at the clock without seeing it. He kept the corners straight on the previous form, while the present measure made its case. When the last note settled, he waited the breath a room deserves, then pressed amber. The proctor's kitchen timer gave its little chirp. He wrote 17 through, no restart. His hand did not shake. He did not turn his head toward the wing. The screen asked for that respect and received it. A whisper at his shoulder. Ms. Alvarez. The late judge behind her, apologizing with a hand to her chest 4 times small cruelty. Thank you, she mouthed to James, and he rose before the next number could make a request of him. He slid the chair back with the quiet a stage asks for, and gathered nothing but himself. On his way down the wing he passed the panelist, taking his place a man with a quiet tie and the shoes of someone who had walked fast and would now sit still. James gave him the smallest nod, and the place gave him back the corridor. At the bottom step he let the breath he had not noticed holding go. Not a sigh. Just air returned to air. He found his table where he had left it, the lamp making it steady. Circle. The cloth folded between uses. The string envelopes fanned to be read at a glance. Miguel glanced up, lifted his chin, said nothing that would disturb the stage. The hum of warm-up rooms drifted like a low conversation. Somewhere a volunteer called 21, and a young voice answered here, though the voice did not belong to anyone until the screen said it did. James set the ready-hold switch box aside, a tool that no longer belonged to his hands, and slid back into his chair. He wiped a fine powder of rosin from the table with the back of a folded cloth. He checked the ribbon on the chinwrist key, as if it had tried to wander. He listened with the ear of a person who has learned the shape of other people's chances, and knows when to touch them and when not to. The judge's table had its 3 pencils again. The stage kept its quiet seriousness, and he, who had sat where he was put, and then stepped back when asked, returned to the job that had brought him. Steady hands, common sense. A small lamp in a corridor where numbers turned into sound, and the day kept time without raising its voice. The warm-up room had no windows, only a long rectangle of fluorescent panels that hummed softly, as if they were thinking. 4 metal chairs faced a wall of soundproofing panels, cut into squares. A clock hung high where no one could reach it, the hand that ticked seconds, shaped like a thin needle. 2 music stands stood at the ready, their trays scarred with small crescents, where clips had once bitten too hard. A sign taped to the door. Read max capacity, 4, and below it, in a smaller hand. Please keep scales short. Ava set her case on the chair nearest the corner, and eased the latches open with the care of someone who had learned that a fast hand breaks what a slow hand saves. She lifted the violin by the neck, thumb under, fingers over, and rested it on her knee while she found the folded cloth. The case still carried a faint, clean resin smell that never announces itself until the lid opens. Her number 47 was clipped to the handle with a small black spring the hall provided. The clip had pinched a crease into the paper that would never flatten out again. Her friends came in half a step behind her, their talk arriving before they did. Lila dropped her backpack and went straight to the stand to raise it an inch. Beatrice kept the door from swinging back with her foot and then let it close with a modest, padded thud. They were nervous in the friendly way of people who are willing to lend their nerves to someone else for a minute. "We've got time," Lila said to the clock, which did not agree or disagree. "You're fine," Beatrice said to the air, and the room accepted the compliment on everyone's behalf. Ava set her chin rest cloth where it always sat, folded twice to match the curve. She lifted the instrument and tucked it under her jaw, then drew the bow once across the open A. The note floated, close and simple, and landed without fuss. She tuned the others to a fifth that clicked into place. Another, and another E string answering the last like bricks settling in a wall. Her pegs turned a little too easily, and then held, the kind that had learned the room's temperature, but are still deciding whether to keep it. Lila tried a fast scale that climbed the wall and ran down it again. Beatrice checked a passage she had decided to fear and found it less frightening than it had been the day before. The three of them stood like points of a triangle, the notes between them making a small tent. Only they felt. The clock advanced its needle without offering advice. Ava flipped to the etude. She didn't have yet the title page of a book she had brought, because sometimes the right page makes the wrong one easier. She set it aside. She chose an opening she knew would reach her hands without demanding anything they didn't already know. The bow met the string where sound begins best. Measure 1 matched the memory of mornings. Measure 2 asked for a shift her fingers had learned in 3 parts. Release, move, arrive. Her hand knew it. The notes came like steps on a floor she had helped lay. The fray showed itself where attention isn't. A pale fuzz at the winding near, the nut on the A. 1 thread first, then 2. The way cloth admits it has been rubbed too long. She heard it before she saw it, the faintest wool in the tone, a thistle in the clean line. She stopped. Lila stopped because good friends learn to halt at the same moment, without asking why. Beatrice lowered her bow and came a step closer. "It'll hold," Lila said, squinting as if eyes could persuade string. "Just don't dig in. Maybe tune a hair low," Beatrice offered, lowering the A a shade with her voice, as if that could coax the peg to follow. "Or switch pieces. Start with the quiet thing." Ava set the violin on her lap and turned the peg a degree, then turned it back. The fray did not grow in that second. It waited like a word not yet spoken. The clock advanced. Someone down the corridor found a high C and sat on it too long. The ceiling, hummed. She had a spare in the case. Everyone had a spare, but a string changed in a rush often speaks in a new voice before it agrees to be the old one. She looked at the small packet, untouched since last month, and let it be. The hand knows when it is not hungry. She placed the cloth under the strings at the tailpiece, and wiped rosin where it collects in weatherless rooms. She breathed in, then out, not the deep theatrical breath people take when they want witnesses. Just enough to measure the walls. Lila offered words that had helped before, and would not help now. "Think arm, weight, not pressure. You'll be fine." Beatrice added a trick from a teacher whose tricks always sounded better than they felt. "If your hand shakes, open your left fingers, and close them again. It fools the tremor." They meant every syllable. The room softened them until they were almost kind enough to use Ava set the violin again. The open A answered without complaint. She wrote its line into the excerpt that had frightened her when she first saw it and did not now. The first shift met her halfway. The second pulled a breath and gave it back. The fray whispered in one long note, then quieted when the bow moved nearer the fingerboard. She adjusted by a finger's width. The sound held. The door opened, and a volunteer in soft shoes slid ahead through the gap. "Numbers 45 through 48. You're up next, corridor." 2 minutes. Her voice carried the exact weight of 2 minutes and then was gone. The door sighed against its own latch. Beatrice checked the bow hair near the ferrule. An old superstition. Lila straightened the clip that held Ava's number. Neither action did anything, but both were necessary. Ava closed her eyes and let a single scale climb to the place where the room made a corner and turn there, clean. She did not ask for luck. Luck hates to be asked for. She asked her hands instead. They replied, "Present." The fray showed again when she set the violin down to turn a page. One more thread lifted, 2 small curls like ash. She pinched the place lightly between thumb and forefinger, as if to tell it she had seen it and would not be surprised by it later. The string hummed under the skin, alive and indifferent to human plans. "Ready," Lila said, in the way of a person who cannot walk the next hallway with you and wishes she could. "Ready," Ava said, and the word meant only that her feet would go where they must. Beatrice pushed the chair back with a soft scrape. The clock gave up another second, without ceremony. Ava closed the case without latching it. Warm-up rooms are full of trust then. Remembering the hallway and its quiet, pressed the latches. After all, the hinge made a clean, small sound. She lifted the strap, set it over her shoulder, felt the familiar tug at the place that always protested, and said nothing to it. The door handle was cooler than the room. In the corridor, the carpet took their steps and kept them. Numbers were called and answered. A low murmur moved like a draft. No source you could name. Lila and Beatrice walked a few paces, then drifted back toward the map, because that is where friends go when they cannot follow. Ava found the knot of players marked by their numbers and stood with them. Quiet, a line of breath that belonged to her alone. The string held. The clock moved in small clicks, polite as a librarian. Somewhere, downstage, a light turned. The corridor gathered its own weather. Air from the lobby drifted in cool and square through the panes. Air from the warm-up rooms came, warm, powdered with rosin. Numbers were called, in a voice designed not to startle. 45 went, then 46. Players stood with cases open at their feet, instruments in the crook of an arm, bows laid hair up across shoulders to keep from catching on someone else's sleeve. The carpet held every step and kept it. Ava eased the violin under her chin, tested the A again, the way one touches a wrist to learn whether a kettle is close to boiling. The fray at the nut had learned its own mind. It had not grown, and yet it had. 2 pale threads lifted where there had been one. She turned the peg a breath, then back, the movement so small, the wood considered, and did not commit. Lila stood just behind her shoulder, with the posture of a person prepared to catch what cannot be caught. Beatrice watched the number board, as if the glowing digits could lend composure by the act of being counted. 47 to the call. A volunteer said softly, head half in the doorway, tone set to reassure and not remind. Ava nodded. The peg cooled in her fingers. She drew the bow once, near the fingerboard, coaxing the line rather than asking for it. The note rose, and carried the room with it for a fraction, bright enough to do the job. She settled the violin, wiped a faint dust from the strings with the cloth she always kept folded in halves, set the cloth down, lifted again. The peg slipped a quarter turn, not a jump but a surrender, and the pitch fell under her hand, like a step that isn't there when you reach for it. She steadied, brought it back, tiny breath of turn, a correction so modest no one else would have named it. The fray whispered against the nut like a secret, trying to become a word. Someone down the hall finished with a tidy cadence that let applause exist only in thought. A door sighed and met its own latch. The screen on stage would have turned from green to amber. Time moved forward in small, polite increments. 47. The volunteer called again, not louder, only newer. Ava said. Her feet. She drew the bow in a narrow ribbon across the string once, twice just to lay down a line for her hands to step on later. Lila's fingers hovered near the scroll without touching. Beatrice watched her friend's mouth and saw the shape of breath held and released. The sound broke, the way dry twigs break. A quick high tick, and then the slap of something released too fast. The A string let go at the nut, recoiled, and left a stinging kiss on the soft web between Ava's thumb and forefinger. The other strings vibrated in sympathy, an involuntary chorus, then quieted. For a beat, the corridor did not know what to do with the absence where a note should have been. Ava's eyes closed without closing her face. Her hand opened, then closed, and in that small movement lived 3 months of mornings and the corridor's entire length. The sting rose like heat, and then became only knowledge. Skin remembers. She did not cry. The near cry came up and stopped behind her teeth. A well-drilled halt called at the edge of a road. Lila said, "Okay," the kind of word people use when they are building a floor out of thin air. Beatrice unzipped the side pocket of the case and found the spare, then looked at the clock. then back at the packet, and could not remember whether a new A would hold fast enough to be trusted by a judge who had never seen her play. The tech table was close to the corner, lamp making its small lake of light. James heard the sound without seeing it. There are a dozen kinds of string failure, and only two that make that particular double voice: the pluck of sudden slack, and the elastic bites of skin. His hand had already found the envelope marked up before his eyes found her number. He lifted the soft cloth with the other hand, the one he kept for laying instruments down when panic wants to set them down too hard. Miguel rose in the same moment, the way to steady hands rise to the same problem from different chairs. The glance they traded was brief and exact. "I'll go." "Go." James stepped into the corridor, half an angle slower than a hurry. The measured pace of a person who knows that speed can make a small thing into a larger one. Numbers shifted politely to let the cloth pass. The ribboned key tapped once against James's shirt pocket and went still. He did not look at faces. He looked only at the instrument held in a grip that was correct, and also on the verge of being too tight. "It's all right," he said, "but not to her. Not to anyone." He said it into the air, the way you say steady. "To your own hands." The volunteer with the clipboard had already begun the quiet calculus of schedules. "We can take 48 first," she murmured, finger pressed to the list, eyes on no one in particular. 47, to instrument help, then back in rotation. Lila nodded at words she could not yet use. Beatrice lifted the packet of spare strings, then lowered it again when she saw James's envelope, then hovered with both because hovering, just then, was a job. Ava turned the violin and set it belly down on the cloth James had unfolded over the nearest chair. The chair was wrong for instruments and right for this moment, because it was what they had. Her hands hovered, then settled at her sides, as if asked to show their empty palms to calm the room. The welt in the web of her hand tasted like nickel and surprised. James did not reach for the scroll. He let his hand rest on the table edge until hers was still. He set the envelope down where she could see the letter printed on the sleeve. He glanced at Miguel, who had closed the distance and now stood ready, a bridge gauge already in his palm. Not because they would need it, but because tools in hands make space for breath. 40. The volunteer called, gentle and certain. The number stepped forward and disappeared around the corner, toward the stage door. The corridor allowed itself to exhale. Somewhere behind the screen, a bow hair caught on a sleeve and freed itself. Farther off, a kettle in the green room let out a beginning whistle and was hushed. The hall's steady hum did not change. Overhead, the fluorescent panels held their long, patient glow. Ava rubbed her thumb against the sting and looked at the broken end, the way one looks at a thread pulled from a cuff and wonders how long it had been loose before it showed itself. Leela stood where she could manage the case lid when it needed to close and the latch when it needed to click. Beatrice found the cloth a fold and offered it to no one and to everyone. James slid the soft cloth an inch to ease the violin further from the chair's edge. He placed the spare string next to the tailpiece and set the small coil at rest, the ball end gleaming like a coin someone might have dropped and decided not to look for. He did not yet say the sentence, "That will belong to the next minute." He kept his voice in his pocket with the key and let the corridor hold the silence it had earned. 47 will return. The volunteer told the clipboard in the calm of a person telling a clock it is doing fine. The number on Ava's chest did not change. Her breath did. It went in and came out all the way. James lifted his eyes once to the map at the end of the hall, and then back to the instrument in front of him. He knew every step from here to the stage, and which ones could be saved by competent hands. He laid the envelope open along its seam and tipped the new string into his palm as if it were an ordinary thing, which, in the right light and the right room, it was. The next chapter of the morning waited a half inch from beginning. Miguel was already at James's shoulder, hands open. A small nod exchanged that meant what words would have messed up. "You take lead, I'll back." Protocol was a kind of kindness here. James had said yes to it in a quiet office with a window. He kept his part now. He set the cloth square and stepped half a pace back so the lamp's circle fell where it should. Miguel slid into the light. "Belly down," Miguel said. Not to her, to the work. Ava turned the violin on the cloth. The wood kissed fabric and went still. Miguel lifted the broken end beside the nut with the tip of his thumbnail and laid it across the fingerboard as if demonstrating a fault to an apprentice. "There," he said, and that was enough history for the moment. James opened the paper sleeve, let the newer spiral into his palm, and placed it in the triangle of space beside the saddle. No flourish. Strings look better than they feel. "You Treat them as what they are, still made modest by winding. Miguel steadied the tailpiece with 2 fingers, guided the ball into the slot until the loop found its seat, and refused to argue. A small click lived in the wood and then was gone. Over, Miguel murmured. The new line crossed the bridge clean, the notch catching it without a fuss. James eased the old thread away from the peg and set it to the side, a curl of spent strength. Miguel rolled the peg toward him, found the old hole, and chose a new one 1/2 degree off so the wrap would bed fresh. He set the string end in, left a whisper of slack for the first turn, and began to wind. Toward the pegbox cheek, then back, the coils neat, crossing once to teach the line not to slip later when a room runs cold. Peg compound went on in a breath, enough to remind wood and wood to be friends. He tuned up in steps, never straight to pitch. A quarter turn. Listen, another. Listen, the bridge leaned a hair forward. James's fingers were there before the lean became a tilt. 2 flats of skin on the crown, drawing it home with the respect you give a thing that carries more than its own weight. The nut held the string in the shallow V where it belonged. Miguel stopped a shade low, left the line to settle, then reached for the fine tuner and walked it up by grains of metal until the A stood where it was asked to stand. He checked the other strings with the soft back of his hand. Not pitched, the way tension radiates into near friends. All even. He rolled the peg a breath to set it and took his fingers away, as if making room for gravity to do the rest. The whole thing had taken less than a minute, which is as long as a minute needs when everyone in it minds their job. James held out a bandage. Ava shook her head once. The welt had gone from sting to fact. Lila exhaled for the first time anyone could hear. Beatrice folded the spare's empty sleeve in halves and held it flat as though ordered itself. Might keep the new line honest. Miguel lifted the violin from the cloth and settled it into Ava's hands without lifting his eyes higher than her knuckles. No names, no conversation. The instrument knew the route back. Her chin met the rest in one practiced tilt. She drew the bow across the open A. The sound came new for one heartbeat, bright. A hair to clean then, warmed in the room, and grew familiar by the second stroke. Half steps above and below tested the bed the string would sleep in. It did not complain. James watched the bridge again. A last look a carpenter gives a door after the latch clicks. Straight, feet seated. He damped the other strings with the soft of his palm and let the A speak alone. The corridor seemed to lean to listen, and then it did not, because corridors prefer to mind their own business. Back in rotation, the volunteer with the clipboard asked the air around them. The pen poised but not yet touching paper. Back in rotation, Miguel said in the voice of a person signing for a parcel. The volunteer wrote 47, next to a new line that wasn't there a minute ago. She stepped away. Numbers aren't heavy if you set them down right. James checked the fine tuner. Turns from bottom. A good middle. Room to go either way. He set the little rubber mute in the case corner where it would not run away again. He smoothed the cloth once and folded it into a smaller square. He had not once looked her in the eye. It wasn't coldness. It was the particular courtesy of a place that believes fair can be made, if only by attention to tiny things. Lee's hand hovered in the air between a touch and a not touch on Ava's shoulder, and then chose not to. Beatrice mouthed something that could have been good or go. The light at the end of the hall turned from amber to green for someone else, then back again. A distant lighthouse that had nothing to do with them, and everything. Ava lifted the bow and let one quiet phrase land in the air, half of an old scale, the kind learned before clocks mattered. The new string held without wobble. Her shoulders eased by a degree that would not show on a screen. The corridor exhaled a notch with her. Miguel stepped back into the lamp's edge and wiped a harmless circle of rosin from the table with his thumb, as if erasing a dot on a map. James slid the empty string sleeve into the small bin where other wrappers waited to be counted at the end of the day by someone who liked knowing what left and what remained. He reached to straighten the angle of the lamp's brass clip, the one that turned its mouth too far from the work when a body brushed past. He said nothing for a breath longer than silence needs. Then he spoke one line. Not to give an edge, not to coach, only to set the room back on its hinges. Play what you know by heart. It arrived like a sentence the corridor had been expecting. Not advisory, a reminder that there are rooms, inside rooms, and the best of them do not take tickets at the door. Ava nodded once, the acknowledgement small and complete. She didn't thank him. No one thanks water at a fountain. She raised the violin, and the bow found the line again. The volunteer called her number in that soft administrative tone that keeps panic from thinking it has any right here. Lila and Beatrice fell in behind her for 3 steps. then drifted toward the map because that is where friends go when the rest belongs to someone else. James returned to his chair. Miguel to his. The lamp reclaimed its circle. Behind the screen, a different bow came to rest. Somewhere, the kitchen timer for the judges clicked itself back to 0. The A string settled another fraction closer to temper, and would be done settling by the end of her first page. At the far end of the corridor, the door to the stage opened on its careful hinge. Numbers moved. Air moved. Nothing dramatic announced. Itself, a tiny, necessary thing had been put right. And the morning, glad for the excuse, continued. Numbers do not hurry, even when people do. 47, the stage manager said into his headset, low and even, as if speaking to a pane of glass. The ready light turned green. A volunteer touched the door with 2 fingers and eased it open just far enough. Ava stepped into the small square of space where corridor becomes a wing. The stage keeps its own climate. Cooler by a degree, drier by a whisper. The carpet stripped to center mark lay straight as a rule. The screen stood where it had stood all morning, canvas, stretched clean on a frame, wheels locked, a neutral truth that hid faces and left only sound. A stand waited exactly where some hand had measured it to wait. No chair, no water on stage, no ornament. The hall beyond was a dark sea holding its breath. She breathed once, and felt the new A settle the last fraction it owed. The welt in the web of her hand knew it had been stung, and had decided not to argue further. Her number 47 sat on the clip at her case back in the corridor. On stage it existed only in the proctor's book, and in the quiet of the panel's forms. From the judge's table, Ms. Chen lifted a pencil and let it hover. Mr. Halvorson's thumb found his lower lip again. An old habit settling itself as naturally as a bow finds its balance point. Between them, the third adjudicator, the late arrival with a quiet tie, placed a palm flat on the page, as if smoothing the air across it. In the wing, the kitchen timer set to the prescribed duration, waited to be given a task. The clock on the wall watched without judgment. Ava lifted the violin. The room did not change shape, but it felt as if it leaned slightly toward the act. She set her feet with the modesty that keeps bodies from apologizing for their own balance. Play what you know by heart, the corridor had said. She allowed the sentence to sit in her hands, not as instruction, not even as comfort, simply a fact. Her bow knew the weight that was hers to use. Her left hand remembered the distance between notes it had crossed. More mornings than anyone had counted. She did not begin with the showpiece opening she had practiced into muscle. Not yet. She set the bow half an inch from the fingerboard and drew one plain tone out of the room. It was not a declaration. It was a locating of center, the way a person presses a palm to their chest before speaking so their voice belongs to them when it arrives. The first note held exactly as long as it needed to hold. No longer, no less. It announced nothing. It simply existed, and the whole, which had heard notes behave every way notes can, accepted it and made space. Ms. Chen's pencil did not move. There is little to write about a first note that sits where a first note should. Mr. Halvorson looked down, not to see, but to listen more. The proctor's finger slid the timer to life. A quiet tick under the breath of the stage. Ava turned that tone into a line. Then the line into an opening phrase from a piece older than her, older than most rooms. It was not the concerto's front door yet, it was the small path that leads to it. The hymn-like sentence learned at a table in the living room, where steam fogs, glasses and radios speak softly from down the hall. The bow hair, new in places and tamed by rosin in others, met the string with an honesty that did not ask for applause. The phrase rose, turned at the corner it was expected to turn, and came home in the key it had promised at the start. Behind the screen, shoes do not speak. What the panel heard instead was a body's measured conversation with wood and wire. The shift at the second bar, the one that tests attention masked as is, arrived clean. The toe narrowing by a hair and widening again as if passing through a doorway without touching either side. Ms. Chen made 2 small marks, a comma and a breath. Not praise, not correction. A map. The whole adjusted its own lungs. Seats that had been merely objects became listeners by the simple act of being sat in, even if only by air. Up in the west lobby, a volunteer who'd learned to keep track of sound without staring at doors tipped her head and said, "Good tone," to no one, then went back to sorting programs into even stacks. In the corridor, the lamp over the instrument table made its small circle on cloth. A ribboned key rested against a shirt pocket. 2 steady sets of hands returned spare envelopes to their places and did not lean toward the wing. Sound travels through halls, as water through pipes. The lamp did not need to hear to know it was being of use. Ava let the small melody finish its thought and did not hurry the silence that follows rightful endings. Then she placed her hand where measure and muscle memory ask, and gave the panel the excerpt they had asked for. The tempo sat squarely on its feet. She did not rush past the easier bars to flee toward trouble, nor did she set up a camp on the safe ground to avoid it. In the high shift, her fingers opened and closed. Once a visible mercy given to Tremorand landed. The new A, bright for a minute in the corridor, had by now learned the room. It sang not as newcomer, but as citizen. James, 20 yards and 2 walls away, felt that first note in the way people feel whether change in the room's posture more than its temperature. He did not step toward the wing. He folded a cloth in half, and then in half again, and set it just so. Miguel's shoulder shifted back in his own chair, the easy settle of a carpenter, satisfied with a joint that fits. Neither spoke. There are stretches of work that become prayer without asking permission. On stage the etudes run supposedly plain, and therefore merciless, arrived with the humility it demands. No gloss, no grit left for the panel to forgive. The moving line sat lightly on a left hand that released as much as it grabbed. A small wobble, in one measure, threatened to put its foot wrong, and then decided to behave. The bow found a narrower lane, and stayed there. Ms. Chen circled nothing. Mr. Halvorson's pencil lifted, and placed a dot above a slurra, private system that meant thoughtful. To him and no one else, Ava gave them the last 4 bars as written, not as improved. She allowed the final note to stop when the ink on the page told it to stop. She did not sand its edge with an extra breath. The quiet that followed was not the quiet of relief. It was the quiet of a room that has been correctly used. She turned the page. And the panel, hearing paper more than seeing it, liked the sound. No frantic flutter, no hunt. The first phrase of the concerto, just the opening. Just enough to show how her hands conceive of dignity was not grand. It did not need to be. The line described a curve most players try to draw wider than the paper allows. Hers fit. When the harmonic came, it floated where harmonic should float. Not whispered into place, but set there and trusted. The kitchen timer ticked toward its end. Small and impartial. Miss Chen wrote one word centered and set her pencil down for a breath, the rest of the line already living in her inner ear. Mr. Halvorsen let his hand fall from his lip and sat back, the half-inch a chair knows as yes. Ava did not think about the corridor, or the clip, or the welt, or the voice that had said the sentence she had borrowed. She thought about the small square of space the bow needed to stay honest, and the fact that behind cloth and wood, a table of strangers was asking only whether she could keep a promise to the page under light. The first note had told the truth. The next ones kept telling it. When the proctor's timer breathed its little chirp, she completed the bar she was in, let the line arrive where it was meant to arrive, and lowered the instrument by a finger's width. The ready light turned amber. She waited a beat, for permission, not for approval, for the dignity of endings. Then turned to the wing she could not see. Numbers do not bow. People do. She inclined her head to the empty room beyond the screen, as to a person who had listened without wanting to be thanked. Then she left the way she had come, along the carpet that tells no stories, past the screen that keeps promises, into a corridor where the air had changed only by a degree, and where her friend stood at a respectful distance from the next person's breath. The door from the wing closed on its felt edge, and made the quiet that follows not a hush, but a seal. Ava stepped back into the corridor air, and it met her like water after a dive. Same temperature, different pressure. The lamp at the instrument table kept its small circle. Numbers stood where numbers stand, facing no one and everyone at once. 48, the volunteer called, already turning a page. The hall's weather continued. Lila and Beatrice did not lunge. They made space that looked like ordinary distance. Water, Lila asked the way someone might say stairs. A label, not a plan. Beatrice held out the case strap, and Ava set the instrument down long enough to let her shoulder forget its own vigil. The welt in the web of her hand had flattened to a pale half-moon. She flexed and stopped. The movement so small it could have been a thought. Downstage, the kitchen timer rewound itself back to an even row of numbers. Up the hall, the west lobby glass threw a rectangle of light onto the carpet that feet stepped through, and did not disturb. Ms. Alvarez came past with a fresh stack of forms clipped square, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She did not look. 4 faces. She counted paper by weight and kept the day in order. Ava loosened the bow, a turn and a half. The practiced kindness to hair that has worked. The new A had settled its last fraction. She touched it with the soft of the bow at the node and heard the harmonic float. A confirmation that only needed to please one person. Leela rechecked the latch she already knew was shut. Beatrice said good in a way that described the angle of the case on the floor and nothing else. The rest could be named later, or not at all. James did not lift his head when the door closed. He saw the change in the corridor. Before he saw her the way, conversation drops half a notch. When someone returns from the place beyond the screen, he straightened a sleeve of spare envelopes so their corners learned to share a line. Miguel tested the mouth of the lamp's clip and turned it a degree back toward the table. Under the cloth, a fine dust of rosin had drawn itself into a map without asking permission. James brushed it into one faint cloud and then into nothing. A proctor walked the forms from the stage to the desk outside the door. Each page marked with a circle that meant the day had made a decision, one way or the other, and would not announce it yet. The circles looked the same from 20 feet. The difference lived in the air between pencil and paper when the mark was made. That space belonged to the table and the screen, and would travel later in an envelope. Still without a name. 47. You'll check back for postings, the volunteer said in the tone that makes instructions feel like directions to a familiar street. Ava nodded. Her mouth did not shape thanks. Her chin did the work. She lowered the violin into the case, with the exact turn that fit scroll to nest and bridge to pillow. The string she had not needed to change lay flat under the spare packet, obedient and unnecessary. She closed the lid. The latches clicked, with that particular modesty metal can have when it knows. It holds wood steadier than hands do. She turned toward the table, because the table stood between her and the lobby. James looked down, because looking down is sometimes the only honest way to look at someone you love, when the room has asked you not to know them. He set the bandage he had not offered back in the small bin. It made a sound like a card placed lightly on a deck. Miguel counted fine-tuners across the day so far, an inventory that relaxed his hand by asking nothing of his heart. They passed within 2 steps. Ava's shoulder knew the lamp's heat before her face knew the men. Her eyes slid past without fixing and did not return. James breathed in on the beat between footfalls and out after a small interval that belonged to no clock. The ribboned key tapped his pocket once. He thought pointlessly, entirely of the angle of the bridge, after a long note, and found it still true in memory. He did not lift his hand. He did not make a shape of this moment, that the corridor would have to carry Dot in the lobby. The panes held the river's Brighton squares. People stood by the registration easel in the way of people waiting for something that is not a bus. Patient. Scanning. Pretending to be reading when their eyes are counting. Who breathes easier, and who does not? A mother adjusted a collar that was fine. A father checked his watch and remembered he had checked it. 2 players compared rosin brands with the seriousness that makes small things into steady ground. Ava took the cup Leela had conjured and did not drink. She touched the rim to her lip as if to confirm water's presence, and then lowered it. Beatrice used the cup to indicate a bench, and the 3 of them sat without sitting for long. They watched the far door open and the near door close and made no remarks. A bulletin board held a summer schedule for rehearsals with neat squares around dates that were not today. Someone had added a smiley face in red ink to the week of camp. The red had bled and made a small halo. Back in the corridor, 51 went by holding a viola at an angle that spoke of respect more than ease. The lamp warmed the table another degree. Miss Alvarez left a granola bars under the edge of the bin, the way people who run mornings learn to leave small food in plain sight. James moved one into the pocket of his bag without thinking about it. The way a person sets aside something that will be asked for later by someone else. Miguel rewrapped a roll of gaffer tape that had begun to argue with itself. The proctor's steps returned, even and unpersuasive. A rhythm that brought with it 3 new forms clipped back. A hand the quiet tie had written one more word on a margin, where words rarely live. Listen. Ms. Chen had drawn an arrow that pointed from a bar line to a breathmark. Mr. Halvorson's dot above the slur repeated itself twice, and then ceased, a private alphabet finishing its own sentence. The day made a turning that no one saw. Light on the lobby floor eased to the left by an inch. A gust from the river pressed a cool square through the gap where the doors never fully meet, and lifted the top edge of a flyer no one had noticed until it moved. Ava stood back later, she said to the room, which took it as a promise to itself. Lila and Beatrice walked with her as far as the second tile seam, and then veered toward the map, again for no reason they could name. They passed the instrument table, the way people pass a corner they have built their morning around. Ava did not slow. James turned a pencil, so its point faced under the lampshade, and would not dry. The ribboned key lay still. The spare envelope he had emptied an hour earlier sat in the bin with its mouth open, waiting to be counted by someone who liked numbers because they do not ask to be forgiven. At the far end of the corridor, a volunteer changed the whiteboard from first round in progress to hold 4-panel with a felt marker that squeaked politely. The squeak traveled and then died like a cricket that knows when to stop. The kitchen timer slept. The ready light stayed amber. Sound retreated to the rooms where it starts over. Outside the panes, the river kept its slow, muscular argument with the pilings and hid its effort under a surface that looked like ease. Inside, the hall adjusted its shoulders and prepared to begin again whenever the panel asked. James checked the angle of the lamp one last time and let his hands rest open on the table. Miguel leaned back, the inch-a-good chair allows, and closed his eyes for the length of a breath, not longer. The morning that had been a string, a silence, a sentence, and a note became a hallway again. The next piece of paper waited for a circle. The next number waited for a voice, and everyone who had something to carry carried it, without telling the corridor what it was. Between rounds, the hall let out a small breath. Doors settled on their hinges. The stage crew rolled the screen a foot back and then forward again so the wheels would remember obedience. In the west lobby, sunlight squared itself on the floor and climbed a stair by an inch. The registration easel had been turned to face the panes. A clean sheet of paper waited under 4 corners of tape that held like clear THUMBPRINTS. Alvarez walked from the judge's table with a folder against her hip and a pen trapped under her thumb. She did not hurry. The distance between panel and glass should not be run. At the desk outside the stage door, she stopped and spoke quietly with the proctor, who nodded and pointed to the clock. Somewhere, in the green room, a kettle confessed it was ready and was forgiven. Outside the panes, a gull took a decision and unmade it in 2 wing beats. The paper on the easel did not carry names. It offered a heading in a font without opinion, advancing to final round. Below, 2 even columns of digits. The pen wrote them slower than the room wished, slower than impatience deserves. 9, 12, 17, 23. The nib paused while the page took more breath, then continued. 31, 34, 37, 41. The pen lifted, moved to the second column, as if stepping onto an adjacent stone. 44, 47, 52, 56. She set the cap and pressed the tape edges once, with the flats of her fingers. 20 minutes, she said to the air. It was enough time for someone to find a drink of water, and not enough for a story to begin and end. The lobby filled the small silence with the shuffle people use when deciding how much space belongs to them. Ava stood 3 steps back, shoulder out of the river of feet. Lila read the left column aloud under her breath, and then the right, as if numbers behaved better when spoken. Beatrice did not read. She watched Ava's face, the way sailors watch the line, where water becomes sky. When she reached the second column, Ava stopped listening. The digits had already struck their small bell inside her. 47. She looked again, as if the number owed her a second appearance. It did not. It stayed where it was, still ink, still dry. She did not smile. Leela did it for her. A quick flash that doubled as a breath, and then went away because this was not the place for celebration. Beatrice touched Ava's elbow once and let go. They stood with nothing to do with their hands. The glass caught their shapes, and the river behind them. James stayed in the corridor, as if distance could make neutrality easier. He knew the timing of postings from other mornings with other ledgers. He heard the sound a small crowd makes when it chooses reading over guessing, a hush that tilts toward paper. He did not step into the lobby. He watched the lamps circle instead, as if the light held answers that were nobody's business. Miguel flicked a crumb from the table, the way a man flicks a thought he can't use. A stack of programs, reshuffled, twice without moving, slid a half-inch when Ms. Alvarez set the leftover pens beside them. Finals behind screen, new numbers, she told the volunteer at the door. Repertoire, excerpt 2, then concerto first page. The volunteer repeated it once to fix it in muscle, and then began the quiet work of telling small truths to people one at a time. Back at the glass, a parent took a photograph of the sheet, and a stranger stepped out of frame without being asked. A hand with a ring tapped a number that belonged to someone not standing there. A boy with a viola case nodded, as if at a sentence he already knew, and went to find a chair that wobbled, and then did not. The numbers, indifferent to all this, kept being themselves. Ava did not move until the room let her. Leela glanced at the clock. 20, she said, which meant 15. Now. Beatrice handed over the case strap, and Ava took it. The web of her hand had faded from red to the plain history of skin. They walked not to the warm-up rooms. Those were for many, but to the short hallway marked final round. The kind of sign that tells truth without trying to be grand. James wrote one line in his ledger without looking down to see the letters form. July 20th. Finals posted. 47. He added no price, no note. The graphite sat in its pale lane and did not require witness. He closed the book halfway and left it there, as if asking it to breathe. In the final warm-up space, smaller than the first, and quieter by intention, the fluorescent panels hummed as before. A single stand, one chair, a sign on the wall, familiar handwriting. Keep excerpts honest. Ava opened her case and tightened the bow a degree less than habit. The new A had finished, settling. It no longer called attention to itself. Her hands treated it as a citizen among neighbors. She played a line not from the page but from the walk between lobby and corridor, a thread of sound long enough to tie one room to the next. The judges returned to their table with new forms and the same pencils. Mr. Halvorsen sat, pressed his thumb to his lip, and then removed it, as if reminding himself he had a different kind of listening to do now. Ms. Chen drew a small bracket on a blank margin and wrote nothing inside it. The quiet Tai adjusted the kitchen timer to a number that belongs to nothing but finals and set it down with the care given to fragile clocks. Ms. Alvarez stood at the wing and looked like a person who has moved a day across a river on stepping stones and has one stone left. She touched the ready switch box with a fingertip to nudge it into the present. The screen waited where it should. The carpet lay without complaint. The hall held the last of the morning before it turned into afternoon. Ava, shoulder square, lifted the instrument and set her feet the way you do when you are not arranging for luck, but for balance. Lila stood at the mouth of the hallway, as far as rules allowed, and made herself smaller than her hope. Beatrice looked at the floor because sometimes wood is the only thing steady enough to look at. In the corridor, the lamp warmed the brass clip. The ribboned key lay quiet in James's pocket. He straightened the spare envelopes to make the corners share a line. He did not go to the lobby. He did not need the glass. The number had already found him without crossing the room. He breathed, counted to account no panel keeps, and listened to the slight change in air that comes when a door opens on a hinge that has decided to do its work without sound. Final rounds redraw the day. Numbers go back into a small box and come out as different shapes. The proctor held the bowl as if it were water. One by one, hands reached, lifted a folded square, read a digit that would be theirs for the next few minutes, and no more. Ava's slip said 8. She nodded at a truth that required no witness and tucked the square under her case handle where the clip had learned to hold paper without bruising it. The wing felt cooler now, not with weather but with purpose. Morning's murmur had thinned to the kind of quiet that listens even when no one is playing. The screen stood exactly where it had, only the light on it had shifted from right to left with the sun. The carpet strip still told feet where to go and said nothing more. Candidate 8. The stage manager said softly into his headset. The ready light turned green with the calm of a traffic signal in an empty intersection. Ms. Alvarez checked the kitchen timer and set it farther from the edge, as if the day might knock it off with a sleeve if given the chance. At the table, Ms. Chen squared her forms and drew a small bracket on a clean line. A private habit that meant begin. Mr. Halvorsen loosened the set of his shoulders and let his thumb leave his lip. The quiet Tai placed his pencil perpendicular to the paper and waited. Ava stepped along the carpet, as if the strip itself were a staff, and her feet the notes that must belong to it. She set the stand a touch lower than morning, not to make a statement, only to make a breath easier to place. The violin settled under her jaw with the familiarity of a seat in a bus she'd taken too many times to name the route. The repair day belonged now. It did not ask the room to notice its second life. The second excerpt goes at you from the side. It looks plain, and then changes angles without warning. She found the first corner with the middle of the hair, not the edge sound that speaks without The run that follows wanted a hurry. She did not grant it. She kept time where time lives in the left hand's release, not the right arm's push. Ms. Chen wrote one word, where words fit like furniture, shape. Mr. Halvorsen drew the tiniest of hooks over a slur, which in his alphabet meant, let this bend and no more. Ava let the low string carry its share of work, not leaving it to the bright one to charm the whole. The crossing under the bow, the one that tells whether a player knows the phrase made no announcement. It happened. It was clean. It disappeared. The kitchen timer ticked with the politeness of a clock that knows when to be ignored. The proctor's hand hovered at its knob. Not yet. Not yet. Breath between excerpt and page is a movable thing. Some spend it. Some save it. She stood in the small silence and let it fall where it belongs. Just long enough to be a hinge. Not long enough to be a gap. The concerto's first page looked back up at her, with the face of a piece that has met too much pride in its life. She bowed to it without lowering her eyes. The opening line took its arc like a bridge that trusts its own span. No droop at mid, no extra brace to make spectators feel safe. The vibrato stayed where it belonged inside the note, not on top of it. When the leap came, the one everyone listens for, because it tempts a show, she let the left hand open and close once. The same mercy she had given it in the morning. Then placed the finger down on the exact piece of wood that would keep both pitch and dignity. The high harmonic arrived, as if it had been waiting for them. Not summoned by tricks, but met on the path. Behind the screen, Miss Chen's pencil hovered, and then made a single caret at the top of the staff. Mr. Halvorsen wrote nothing. He sat, with his hands folded for 2 measures, a rare empty gesture that meant more than any mark. The quiet tie set the point of his pencil in the corner of the form, and drew the smallest square, his way of saying settled. In the corridor, James did not move. The lamp warmed the brass clip to the same temperature as a palm. The ribboned key did not stir. Miguel leaned forward 2 inches, elbow on knee, then leaned back again, as if adjusting a level that was already true. On the lobby glass, the sun crept another inch and found a thumbprint in the tape that held morning's list. The print going from invisible to present and then back again. On stage, halfway down the page, a rest appears that isn't long and feels long anyway. She let it be itself. She did not sand it down. When sound returned, it did so on the hairline between caution and confidence. The bow stayed narrower than the adrenaline would have liked. The left hand's 4th finger, the one that sometimes thought it had seniority, kept its opinions to itself and put down what was asked. The timer's wheel reached its last quarter. Miss Chen drew a small line at the margin that meant, "From here we know." The last phrase of her page had a tendency in practice to tell the story twice. She told it once. No bloom on the final note. No extra sugar on a fruit that was already ripe. The quiet chirp came, not a command, just a reminder. She finished the bar in front of her, set the bow down the width of a hair, and lifted the instrument the height of a breath. She did not bow. Numbers do not bow, and today she was a number that had done its work. The ready light went amber. The screen kept her secret once more. She walked back along the strip of carpet without looking left or right. In the wing, she passed Ms. Alvarez, who pressed the spacebar on the timer and touched the forms into a stack, as if aligning them might help the minutes hold together. The proctor reached for the next slip in the bowl. A different pair of feet took the carpet. The hall's weather continued. At the instrument table, James set his palms flat and then separate, a gesture that keeps hands honest after being still. He did not look toward the wing. He straightened a sleeve of empty string packets that had fallen out of line by nothing more than air. Miguel rewrapped the gaffer tape that had again decided it preferred to be a spiral with a tail dot in the final warm-up space. Lila exhaled in a way that did not become a sound. Beatrice closed Ava's case latches, 1 then 2, as if they were doors in a house that sleeps better when they are shut. The welt in the web of Ava's hand had become a memory even her skin was willing to forgive. She pressed the soft of her thumb to the repaired A, and felt nothing but string. She did not say good or bad. She said, done, and the word behaved like water set back on a table. Back on stage, Miss Chen placed a circle in the place on her form where circles live when a day wants more from a player than 1 page allows. Mr. Halvorsen placed his dot above a slur and then, after a breath, added a second dot beside it, a rare double that meant stay in this lane. The quiet tie wrote a single sentence on the lower margin. 7 words that would travel in a sealed envelope to a number that would make sense of them later. He underlined none. The screen did not know any of this. It kept doing its one job, hiding a face so sound could be exactly itself. The whole stood in its afternoon, ready for whatever truth would be written on the glass. When ink met tape again, outside the river, leaned and unleaned against the pilings, with its ordinary will. Inside, the day stepped to its next stone, steady, unhurried, certain of where the path was, even if no one said it out loud. Finals emptied sound out of the hall, the way tide pulls water from between pilings, quietly, decisively, leaving everything wet. The screen rolled 3 feet back, so a crew hand could sweep a line of dust no one but the crew sees. then rolled forward until the wheels clicked into their old obedience. In the west lobby, the easel faced the panes again. A fresh sheet waited under 4 neat corners of tape. The glass held the river in squares. Ms. Alvarez came with a folder that makes a day official. She set it on the easel's ledge, pulled a cap from a pen with her teeth, and laid the cap on the opposite corner so wind would not take it. The heading at the top did not try to be grand. Scholarship recipient, plain black. Under it a single line waited. She wrote, with the speed that respects eyes. Letters formed without flourish. She pressed each tape corner with the flats of her fingers. The way you settle a blanket, so it will not argue. Thank you for your patience, she said to the air. Which is the only honest thing to say to a small crowd. Names are heavier than numbers. The lobby felt it. The parent's hand went to a shoulder that had not asked for it. A phone lifted, and then lowered before the screen could reflect a face that was not ready to be seen. A boy in a too large jacket read 3 times, and then once more, as if repetition could make ink behave differently. Someone made the sound people make when a thing is both exactly right and unexpectedly real. Half breath, half laugh, already passed before a second could join it. Ava stood 3 steps back. Lila read the single line in a whisper that kept it private, even as she said it aloud. Beatrice did not read. She looked at Ava's mouth and watched it do nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The river outside leaned toward the pier and leaned away again. Ordinary work done in public. James did not go to the glass. He knew the weather of announcement. By the way, conversation changes timbre. At the instrument table, he set the lamp switch to off and let the bulb remember dark. Miguel counted empty string sleeves and winked one into a pocket to throw away later, not because it mattered, but because counting likes an even number. Ms. Alvarez came down the corridor with 2 volunteer pins in her palm, small enamel ovals that said City Youth in letters to tidy for such a long day. She set one by the lamp, one in Miguel's hand, and squeezed James's arm with the brief pressure people use when words would wobble. Thank you, she said, for the quiet fixes. He nodded. Quiet fixes had been the whole day. The ribboned key tapped his pocket once and went still. He opened the ledger because that is what hands do when rooms change shape. July 20th. Finals. He paused, because words arrive slower when they want to be exact. He wrote, name posted, bus 2.50, stringer, installed. Note, heard first note from the corridor. The graphite lay down where it was asked. He closed the book halfway to let air under the page. Footsteps changed at the far end. You can hear decision in them. Ava turned the corner from the lobby into the corridor, where names are no longer secret and rules about not seeing relaxed their hold. She did not hurry. Leela and Beatrice drifted 2 paces behind, their faces doing the good work of friends open, contained, ordinary on purpose. A volunteer with a clipboard stepped aside without looking up, which is a kind of kindness to Vic. Stopped at the table not because anyone had planned to meet there, but because the corridor had only so many places a moment can take a seat. The lamp's circle cooled on the cloth. The spare envelopes made their even fan. Miguel found a reason to stand and look at a scratch on the wall 3 doors down. James kept his hands on his knees, because keeping them anywhere else might make more of things than the room could hold. Ivor set the instrument case on the floor, and for the first time that day, let the strap fall without guiding it. She looked at his hands before she looked at his face, the way a player looks first at the bridge after a big note. The welt in the web between her thumb and forefinger had faded to the color of memory. She opened her right hand, and there, in the soft center of it, lay the broken strings, small curl steel made modest by failure, sprung into a ring that would never be straight again. She placed it on the cloth, not in his palm, not in the bin, not as trash, just there, inside the lamp's cooled circle, exactly where work had been done. Granddad, she said. The word put the day's corners into a square. He did not stand all at once. He rose the way a careful chair rises evenly. Ava, he said. Names are heavier than numbers, and lighter when carried by 2 mouths. They did not perform an embrace. The corridor would not have minded, but they would have. He reached for nothing. She reached for nothing. Their hands moved instead to small work. He pressed the little coil flat with his thumb and forefinger, until it gave as far as it would, then let it spring back. She adjusted the ribbon on the chin-wrist key, so the knot sat true. The world called this fidget. The world was wrong. It was ceremony at the size the corridor could handle. Congratulations, Miguel said from the scratch on the wall, as if the paint had said it, and he had merely translated. He did not add who or for what. The corridor knew. Ava nodded once. To him, once to the table, once to the cloth that had held her instrument when the string quit, once to the lamp that had made a small circle of day in a place without windows. She lifted the case and set the strap on her shoulder. "I'll be back for rehearsal," she said. Not to James, not to anyone specific. To the building itself. The hall heard her. Buildings do. Lila and Beatrice turned toward the panes, because light is the right thing after a decision. Ava turned with them, then turned back half a degree. "Thank you," she said. To the hands and the cloth, and the key, and the ribbon, and the man who had kept them all from speaking when silence was. The ethic she did not say. For what? Gratitude doesn't need an object if it has a direction. He touched the ledger's cover. "Tea," he said, which meant, "my table by the window. The kettle that knows when to stop. The chair with the jacket in its square of sun. A place where stories can begin one sentence at a time, without being chased." She nodded. "The kind that says yes and later and soon and I know the walk." They parted like people who live in the same map. The river leaned again against the pilings and pretended it took no effort. On the glass, the single line stayed ink. In the corridor, the broken string's small ring lay where she had left it. James slid it to the corner of the ledger and closed the book on it, not to hide, only to keep. The ribboned key tapped once in his pocket as he moved, then quieted. Outside, a gull took a decision and kept it. Inside, a day that had stretched and held and not broken folded itself small and waited on the edge of a ledger, until someone opened to it again. The apartment accepted afternoon the way a folded shirt accepts a drawer, without comment, with a small memory of heat in the fabric. James unlatched the door a half turn, and let it rest against the catch so the hall's stale cool could meet the room's stored sun. He set his canvas bag by the chair and the kettle on the back burner, because back burners are for things that shouldn't be rushed. The jacket on the window chair had found its daily square of light, and kept it with the patience of cloth. On the table, the ledger waited, not open and not closed. A book at half-breath. Ava stood in the doorway long enough to understand where everything lived. She slipped the case from her shoulder and placed it on the floor with the care that keeps wood from remembering a hard landing. The welt in the web of her hand was a faint crescent now, almost a shadow of itself. She looked at the chair by the window, then at the jacket, then at him, and chose the other chair, the one that faced the stove and did not invite long looks. At the river of dust the sun had made visible. "Tea," he said, which was a question and a promise and the name of the first minute of every talk worth having. "Yes," she said, settling her hands on the table in a way that made the day less busy than it had been a quarter hour before. He rinsed 2 mugs and turned the flame down. When the kettle thought about being loud, he put 1 spoon in the sugar jar, because spoons in jars keep talk from jumping a groove, and talk should not jump when 2 people have agreed to begin with. Quiet, the kettle breathed, and he lifted it before it could call anyone. The tea fogged the air between them, and then stopped being seen, and kept being itself. He set her cup where steam would not chase her face, then sat with his own hands circled around heat. The ledger moved the distance of a fingertip without his deciding to move it, the way books do when they remember their job. He let it settle. Ava's eyes traveled the room, as if the rooms she knew were layered under this one, and lined up at the edges, closets that held violins, chairs that held jackets, drawers that kept ledgers with numbers that were not bills. She touched the rim of the cup. "It smells like the old kitchen," she said, meaning not this kitchen, and also exactly this one. He smiled because some sentences ask only to be heard standing up and then left alone. Steam uncurled itself between them. A gull changed its mind outside, and the sound did not reach this high. "I saw the poster on the gate," he said after the first sip. Not as news, not to claim foresight, only to name a stone in the path they had just crossed separately. "I pressed the tape. It didn't need me, it held," she said. Then, after a small pause that did not pretend to be larger than it was, "The string didn't." "No," he said, and reached his thumb and forefinger toward the ledger's edge, then stopped. "Sometimes they break where worry has already thinned them. Sometimes they do," she said, and her mouth did not open for any of the other things strings sometimes do. She lifted her cup, lowered it, set it in a slightly different place, as if teaching the saucer something polite. They were quiet a moment, because quiet had done most of the day's work and deserved its cup. The jacket took on the last of the light and gave it back more slowly. The kettle clicked itself cooler. Far off, a bus called at a stop and was answered by shoes. "Not by this room." "I am sorry," she said. And for a second, the sentence sat on the table like a tool, whose use is obvious and also requires both hands. At the market. I saw you. I kept walking. He rested one hand on the table, palm down, as if showing the wood and knot that had always been there. I lifted my hand, he said. You had company. I did, she said. And a plan for who I was, for that block. At least, it didn't make space for you. That is not an excuse that behaves like an apology. It is only a map of the mistake. He nodded once, slow, because maps deserve time. He took a small breath through his nose, the kind carpenters take when the grain goes a direction you had not planned, and the board still becomes a shelf if you let it. Thank you, he said, for telling me where the road went. She reached into her pocket without looking, and found nothing. She glanced at the ledger, and then at him, a question without a mark. He slid the cover open the width of a finger, lifted the first page gently, and took out the small steel ring he had pressed there when the corridor was still learning its afternoon. He set it between them on the wood, not in the lamp's circle, because the lamp was off, and ceremony should not use light it did not earn. She did not touch it. She looked at it the way people look at a tool they will someday know how to use, and, for now, can only name. It can live here, she said, meaning the table, meaning the ledger, meaning the room, and also meaning not in her pocket. Not yet. If you wanted to. It can, he said, and reached to slide it until it rested against the ledger's lower corner. Like a coin you keep for luck, but never spend. She smiled then, not wide, not brief, a shape that keeps its dignity. They wrote it on the glass. She said, my name looks like everyone else's name, the same ink. I like that. It always did, he said, and let the sentence be simple. They drank. The tea reached its best temperature, and then slipped past it, without either of them minding. He told her, one line at a time. About the morning as he had seen it. The lamp that made a small lake of light for other people's hands. The peg that turned and remembered its job. The mute that tried to run away and had its corner chosen for it. She told him, one line at a time, about the stage as she had felt it. The screen that hid and kept the carpet, that told feet where to be. The timer that became a heartbeat, she did not need. When talk tired, they let quiet work a second shift. He rose, rinsed the cups, and set them upside down on a towel that had been folded into neat quarters. She walked to the chair by the window and put 2 fingers on the jacket's cuff, just long enough to learn that the fabric kept the shape of a wrist if you asked it kindly. She did not try it on. She returned to the table and sat. He opened the ledger because the moment had asked, and because he knew the difference between showing and charging. He turned to the day's page. July 20th, he read the line he had written earlier, and added one more that had no number beside it. Tea by the window. She read the words, and did not ask to see the rest. Records do not argue. They stand. When she rose to leave, the room did not change its size. She lifted the case and set the strap where it sits best. At the door, she paused the length of a rest that feels longer than it is, and looked back at the chair, and the jacket, and the ledger, and the small ring against its corner. Rehearsal is Tuesday, she said. I'll come by after. If the kettle agrees. The kettle agrees, he said. It likes to be useful. She smiled again, the kind of smile a person can carry down 3 flights without spilling, and stepped into the hall. The door settled against the catch. Then the latch. Then the jamb. Each in order. Each with a sound the house recognized. He cleared the table the way a man clears decks for ordinary days. No haste. No display. He moved the ring to the ledger's inside cover and closed the book on it, lightly, to teach it the habit of staying. He turned the lamp so the brass clip faced the work side again, even though there was no work now, only the kind that waits. He adjusted the jacket a finger's width toward the light, not because it needed it, but because care likes to practice when it is not being examined. Outside, the river leaned once against the pilings and kept leaning, which is how rivers rest. Inside, the kettle cooled. The room held both a past and a next Tuesday without wobbling. James sat with his hands open on the table, not to ask for anything, only to let the day finish. When it did, he stood, touched the ledger's spine with his thumb, and slid the drawer closed. It did not stick. It never had.